With Levine, yes. Let me tell you what the game plan is. Oh, this is great. I can walk around and be crazy. I am going to speak for 30 minutes and give you a very professional briefing, a PowerPoint briefing. I wore my suit for you. Everyone please notice the suit. Okay? Yeah, something completely different. And then my good friend Akil Khalid, a blonde, blue-eyed American mujahid, who may be lost right now, but he'll get here within 30 minutes. I just bought him dinner. He will come in and he'll talk about his book, My Jihad. And I'm kind of using him as a counterpoint to me. We also invited that Wired guy, McCullough, whatever, because he makes me look good. So I figured I'd have him as a discussant, and since we dissed each other last night, I thought it was a nice way of apologizing. Not that I need to, but I thought it was a nice way of apologizing. Okay, that's 7 to 8. From 8 to 9, I will then do the everything you ever wanted to know about spying but didn't know who to ask. I'm surprised you haven't had enough of me, but apparently this was pretty popular a couple of years ago when I did it. The original is also available on the web. I don't know the URL, but it's there. Now, from 9 to 10, you guys can do whatever you want. I'm going to go listen to Jello. All right? I'm not going to compete with him. And then from 10 to 12, I've invited Jello to come join me, and we'll answer questions about the state of the world, if you want. And that'll be kind of a cool counterpoint. Yes, sir? Yes. I don't know how we're going to do time warp management, but I'll be flexible. And this guy in the tux, who is, we should give him a hand.
That's like the one
we are behind now. Our jobs are scheduled for 10.
He's like the only thing I actually care about.
Good. Then what I'll do is I'll go to 10 and I will stop. And we will all go listen to Jello, and after Jello, someone can buy me a drink. The guy in the black hat, okay? And I promised my wife I would be in bed by midnight, so this is, I'm hitting 50 this year. No. I know, 2 years ago, there were evil companions with a bathtub full of ice. Yeah, so we're gonna have fun. Now, these are my 2 books, and while we're waiting for techno shit to get ready. These are my 2 books. So we're going to hack Amazon.com, and here's how we're going to do it. In the next 3 days, I will watch the numbers of books that are sold. And for every book that is sold on Amazon.com, I will send Emmanuel a free copy. And so I'll take your word for it. Actually, he'll take your word for it. So you guys pair up. And maybe one of you buy one of these, and one of you buy one of these, and I will send Emmanuel free copies that match those numbers so that you're getting it at 50%. But what you're doing is you're running my numbers on Amazon.com. Okay? So that's the hack. All right? I promise you, I will watch the numbers. I have this little, every publisher has this little thing, and I will ship him boxes of books. I figure only 10 of you will buy it. So this is not a big risk. But if you want it, it's kind of cool. Let me tell you what's good about these books. First off, you can download 1 chapter from each for free from OSS.net. The chapter that you can get from the first book is the President's chapter, Intelligence for Dummies, which is the 14 things he should have done after 9/11 but didn't. Washington is whitewashing our intelligence failure, our counterintelligence failure. And the chapter that you can get from this one, which I'll be talking about, is the 15th chapter on the new rules for the new craft of intelligence, which is basically open. I called this book Personal, Public, and Political because I've come to the conclusion that Washington will not reform itself until you make intelligence and counterintelligence personal, public, and political. In the age of distributed information, intelligence is too important to be left in the hands of a secret bureaucracy. Intelligence must be extended. The practice of intelligence, the proven good practice of intelligence must be extended to the state and local level, and we have to create what are called citizen intelligence minutemen. And we have to create state and local communities of virtual intelligence and counterintelligence. Okay, so I hope we'll have fun tonight. I will be very professional about managing the time. So now that we know, it'll be 7 to 8 for me and Akil doing kind of structured briefs, and then it'll be 8 to 10 for kind of a free-for-all. I will not undress. I did think about changing clothes for the second session. And then we'll all go listen to Jello, which is always a treat. I come here to be refreshed. Do we not have?
We don't have PowerPoint. We have
All right, you're fired. I need a laptop with PowerPoint. Oh, well, maybe we won't shoot you at all. Okay, so you're going to make this work?
Yeah, it's going to PowerPoint right now.
Thank you. Yes, we can do questions. I wrote 85% of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Open Source Intelligence Handbook, which is available on my website. If you go to oss.net and you click on Open Archives and then click on White Papers, you can get the official North Atlantic Treaty Organization Open Source Intelligence White Book. By the way, blue shirts, I was promised a lot of water. I guess this is it. Okay. And what really troubles me is I have generals that say to me, why do I need open source intelligence? I've got an 11-year-old kid that uses the internet. Okay? I'll talk about that for just a couple minutes. Personally, I'm not a fan of Google. I like Copernic.com myself. It just works better for me. You can download it for free at www.copernic.com. And what I like about it, and I'm no expert, but what I like about it is not only does it a meta search engine that has a number of search engines, although not all of the best ones, but it remembers what you've seen. And so if you want to do the search again, then it just brings up the new stuff, except for the assholes that move the period back and forth.
Can you spell
so
it?
that their stuff looks new. What?
Can you spell the URL?
Copernic, C-O-P-E-R-I-C. Copernic. Not Copernicus, but Copernic.com. That's a good starting point. But the other thing that I've found is doing internet searches is not that effective. There's the deep web, which everyone knows. Most of these search engines are less than 16% of what's out there. And so what you really end up having to do is create an internet table. I like the Word document table form. And over time, what I do is I create a table that has the websites, and then I create a column for ranking. And so I basically have a personalized ranking table. And my second book contains tables for terrorism, genocide, crime, corruption, a whole bunch of things. And those are available electronically as well. So where do you go after the internet? Factiva.com, Dialog, LexisNexis. They're all different. Commercial, premium, fee-for-service sources charge money. And what do you get with Factiva? Thank you, sir. With Factiva, bring up cyber advocacy, Pinkham. And you have my, Pinkham on cyber advocacy. You have my permission to copy the entire CD-ROM if you wish. This is good. This is good. I'm going to drink a great deal tonight of water. Cheers. Now let's talk about Factiva. Factiva is the last 2 years' worth of really decent media. It's not all of the foreign language media. I have a tiny little company that has 2 contracts, both with the U.S. government, which allows me to play like this. I got a staff T-shirt as my payment. And one of the things we discovered, we went out and we identified 396 terrorist, insurgent, and opposition websites. They actually exist, 396. That includes the media sites promoting them in 29 languages. 29 languages. And you'll see this on a brief. CIA doesn't do 29 languages. Okay? We're talking Catalan, we're talking Urdu and Pashto and Dari and Farsi. Most of our embassy officers don't speak these languages at any level above where is the bathroom, okay? And this is a really serious thing. Cyber advocacy. Okay. And so you have Factiva, that's 2 years. Then you have Dialogue. What does Dialogue have? Dialogue has dissertation abstracts. It has the Social Science Citation Index and the Science Citation Index. And I have a ranking protocol that allows me to identify the top 100 people in the world on any subject, period. So for example, I'll go in and I'll go into the Social Science Citation Index, I'll go into International Studies. Okay, put it on show. You can stay here, actually. I think you could be useful. Is that all right? Can I serve you a drink of water? Okay. Here you go. Okay. Thank you. And presto, I have the top 100 people in the world in Afghanistan, and only about 10% of them are Americans. But we don't talk to foreigners. Okay, so our government, I did my second graduate thesis on this, our government is operating on 2% of the available relevant foreign language information. 2%. 2%. This is scary shit. Okay, and then they also have conference proceedings. Most information is 10 years old when it's finally published. 10 years old. Okay? So conference proceedings is a really good way to kind of get ahead of the curve. And then, of course, you have LexisNexis, which has public records. All right, this is somebody else's brief. And if you'll forgive me, I'll tell you what, I'll point at you. Change it. Thank you. God bless you. Doug Pinkham, who I know from Boy Scouts, is the president of the Foundation for Public Affairs. Their website is www.pac.org. PAC.org. It has an unfortunate association with Political Action Committee, but PAC.org. And they've done a couple of really cool glossy reports on how the AFL-CIO and other organizations are using the internet to do cyber advocacy. And because of the nature of this group, I wanted to just run through this really, really quickly. And I guess I'll just sit here. And could you make this available to Eric? Okay, so if you guys want this, we'll find a way to put it through the 2600 site. What? Oh, okay. All right, and I'm just going to go through these really quick. I just want to share with you another person's mind and experience before I start my own brief. Okay? These are pluses and minuses. This is a cool brief. And I'm not doing it so you can get it now. I'm doing it so you can come back to it later. Okay? Activist tools and techniques. We haven't made the jump. And one of the things that the first chapter of my book does is talks about we need to use open source intelligence, legally and ethically available information, to monitor the assholes. Okay? Then we need to use the internet to link up together and to put all that together. And then we need to use the internet to basically score elected and appointed officials so that we can then slam their ass when they don't do what we want. Okay? So we're talking here about taking back the power. This is really serious shit. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is a great brief from a person who really knows what they're doing. Okay, good. And here's the, did he not have the website? Okay, good. Now you know that brief exists. And you know that www.pac.org is a cool place to go so that you might have it. Okay, if you would bring up Steele, I'll give you guys my formal prepared brief. Did anyone not get a globe? One of these little blue things. What? Well, then all those people, raise your hands and someone will hand you one. Okay, you with the 20, give them a globe. All right, everybody who didn't get a globe, raise your hand and we will unscrew this. That gentleman with the white shirt has generously handed some out. All right, that's pretty damn decent. Voluntary distributed stuff. I'm reading a lot of books on volunteers right now because volunteers are the future in a lot of ways. Okay, I'm going to do a brief here. New York City is going to get hit again. It's going to happen. Get used to the idea. Because New York City, in the eyes and minds of billions of people overseas, including the 100,000 or so that are really pissed off at us and ready to do something about it, New York City is the eye of the storm for capitalism. There's a hand up there who doesn't have a globe. Okay, good. You're going to get hit again. 9/11 was an intelligence and counterintelligence failure of tremendous proportions. The first chapter in my second book talks about exactly what went wrong. My first book talks about all the things we knew were wrong 10 years ago that could have helped prevent it.
It was planned.
Washington is whitewashing this failure. George Bush has a real serious problem with dealing with accountability. His basic attitude is lay no blame because I'd be fucked first. And let's talk about what to fix. I'm very concerned about that. Now let's talk about the real world. Could a blue shirt go out and look for a one-legged guy wearing shorts? Akil Collins is supposed to be right here, and he may be in the wrong room. He's got a buzz cut, and he's got a long red goatee, and he's got one leg. Oh, here he is. Okay. Welcome, Akil Collins. All right. And he tells me there's nothing inside the leg, but I've got to believe he's got a comm suite in there. Okay. One of my favorite people. This is the real world. We're talking about roughly 75 conflicts that are killing 1,000 people or more every year. Talking about 125 conflicts that are killing less than 1,000 people a year. And we're talking about roughly 175 internal violent political conflicts within countries, okay? It is a really screwed up world, and you don't read about this in the New York Times. You're not taught about this in your schools, and our intelligence community sucks at explaining this to the president. Okay, Gordon Ayler, who was a very top guy in national intelligence, once said, intelligence is remedial education for policymakers. Let me tell you something. Policymakers are very loosely educated. One of them brags about being a C+ person. They're very loosely educated. They really don't know shit about the rest of the world. We have senators and congressmen that brag about not having passports because their constituents don't care about anything that happens in the rest of the world. Now, it's your job as citizen taxpayer voters to make sure that your congressman and your senator understands that the rest of the world really matters, because we're screwing it up big time. Okay, here's some of the numbers. 32 countries have what the United Nations quaintly calls complex emergencies. This is, and Akil is familiar with a number of them. There are millions of refugees displaced in 66 countries. And when you have refugees, you have crime, you have trade in women and children, you have fantastic disease, you have a lot of issues. There is famine in 33 countries. There are modern plagues in 59 countries and rising, including in the United States. Okay, our water security and our food security really stink. Stink. We don't have public health officials at the airports and ports now. We no longer screen incoming passengers. It takes 4 to 6 days to identify an Ebola outbreak in Africa because most of the hospitals don't know what they're looking for, even in Africa. And Ebola got to Kansas 9 months ago, okay? And we have a CDC and a public health infrastructure that's just trashed. And we have a lot of illegal immigrants that won't go to a hospital because they're afraid of being identified, okay? So Los Angeles is a cesspool waiting to explode, among other things. Nothing against Los Angeles, but It's an issue. It's an issue. Child soldiers, other issues. Now, how do we spend your taxpayer dollar? We spend $400 to $500 billion a year while George W. is running us into a deficit. We spend $400 to $500 billion a year on what the military quaintly calls heavy metal. New meaning for heavy metal. We are buying all these aircraft carriers and all these fancy, expensive jets and all these really complex military systems that are useless 90% of the time. Useless. And at the same time, because we are funding what General President Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial congressional complex, we're underfunding diplomacy, foreign assistance, education, a digital Marshall Plan, public health, and saving the environment. Yes, sir?
I know you say they're useless, but don't they actually?
No, they don't, especially when you have suicidal martyrs. The question was, is the Pentagon a deterrent? No, the Pentagon is an incentive. Okay? You know, I've got to tell you two things, and I did my first graduate thesis on predicting revolution. Number one, you got to have power that's actually relevant. Number two, you have to be willing to use that power in a thoughtful way, which we're incapable of. I mean, our government today is incapable of executing an informed foreign policy, which someone brought up yesterday. By the way, I invited that wire guy to be up here. I don't know if he's left town or still mad at me or whatever, but I did invite him to be up here, since Bruce Sterling is not here. I mean, Wired seems to turn them all into a certain kind of creature. Sorry, zing. When it doesn't have too much graphics. I'd cancel my Wired subscription at least once. Okay, so you have to have power that's relevant. You have to be willing to use that power in an informed way. And telling Iraq that we're going to bomb the shit out of them because Daddy didn't finish the job is not real smart. Okay? Because it gives Saddam Hussein a real incentive to fuck with us because we've just put his back against the wall. This is stupid. Stupid. And you as taxpayers should be outraged. Okay? So moving on. There are 4 different kinds of threats in the world. 4. Period. I thought of this in 1988. You've got the Russians and the Iraqs and the major conventional forces. These are states. These are violent states that have uniforms and tanks, and they very, very cutely, very nicely put up for NSA. Hi, our comm center is here. You can listen now. Okay? And then you have low-tech brutes. These are violent non-states. Terrorists, criminal gangs, transnational criminal gangs, ethnic, family-based criminal gangs are a real serious problem. Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean, Russian in particular. Well, CIA and FBI have just decapitated, eliminated their ability to deal with global ethnic crime. They moved everybody that was doing crime and narcotics over to counterterrorism, where they still haven't figured out what they're doing. So we've opened the back door, okay? And the mafia today is toasting CIA and FBI for being dumb shits. Okay, and please don't misunderstand me. I love my government, and I love those 2 agencies, and anything I say that's critical is intended as tough love. Okay? I mean, I'm a shitty businessman, so I think government's important. And then you have low-tech seers. And this is basically billions and billions of people who are dispossessed and fucked over, and they see us as the problem. And the World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund are essentially the front end of our screw job on the rest of the world. We live in an aquarium. There are all these little islands in that aquarium. And we keep pouring our cesspool into the world, and on 9/11 it reached our nose. Okay? That's what it boils down to. Robert McNamara did a good book called Wilson's Ghost with someone else. I reviewed it on Amazon.com. Which, interestingly, the other favor you can do for me is go to Amazon.com and find my reviews. Just look up any intelligence book and And don't worry about time, Akil, because we're going from 7 to 10, so we got plenty of time. Look up any review, and where it says "see more about me," I've been trying to explain to Amazon.com that "see more about me" should say "see my other reviews." Okay. They had this idea about creating a community and all this jazz. Well, I don't give a shit about these other people. I just want to know what books they've reviewed. And so if you go to that, I've got 294 reviews on national security books and volunteers and C4I and all that stuff, which are also in the annotated bibliography of my second book. But you can do me a favor by voting for those, because I'm competing with little old ladies that read romance novels and guys that review videos and software and stuff like that. And I'll tell you, it says something for America and what America is reading, that a guy who reviews only serious... Oh no, I'd much rather have a new battery. Yes, sir. I love authority figures that are competent. Should have had a new battery. Okay, so I use this for a while. After 9/11, America started to read about Islam and terrorism, and it's absolutely amazing. The public has awakened. The public understands. In fact, I got an email from a woman named Barbara Flaska. I presume she's a middle-aged mother, employed somewhere in the Chicago area. And she said, if these people are that mad at us, I want to understand. And I love that. That's one of the coolest emails I've ever gotten. But America, while it's reading, is being unnaturally tolerant of a government that is not doing anything serious. Fox 5 cable version is Bible thumpers who believe the only book they need to read is the Bible. And I know this because every time I appear on Fox 5 Friends and Family cable version, I get all these emails from Bible thumpers who say that I'm being very disrespectful of the president when I say he's not serious about the war on terrorism. We're not serious about the war on terrorism. I call around Washington, including Congress, at 9, 10 in the morning, and no one's answering the phone. We haven't really changed anything that we're doing in Washington, other than moved a lot of people toward it. And oh, by the way, I love the Doonesbury cartoons on the CIA intern. Has anyone seen these? I launched a Predator, fired a missile, you know. It's going to take us 10 years to train these puppies. And oh, by the way, CIA has a 35-year rule, as do most law enforcement agencies. We can't hire anyone over 35. Duh. Maybe we should be hiring hard-ass 50-year-olds that have spent their lifetime overseas and are now ready to do some serious cool stuff for the government, rather than young white boys from Kansas. The reason CIA hires all of its secretaries, including my wife in West Virginia, is because they've never met a Soviet. And so they can be cleared easily. All right? We have the wrong priorities here. We're going after good kids who don't speak a foreign language, have never been overseas, and can get a security clearance, rather than really rethinking. All of you are instantly eligible for my kind of CIA. Except for the really good-looking strawberry blonde with black glasses who works for the FBI. Sorry. It's absolutely fascinating. All right, so we've got some issues out there. Now, Edwin Wilson, E.O. Wilson, has written an excellent book on the future of life, in which he costs out what it would take to save the environment. It's under $200 billion a year. It's under $200 billion a year. That's loose change. Okay? That's loose change. Especially if the U.S. puts up $100 billion and then gets the G8 and the rest of the world to do the other $100 billion. And then finally, you have high-tech Sears, which is a combination of state-sponsored electronic espionage, individual criminal electronic espionage, and info-terrorism and info-vandalism and so on. And when Schwartau and I opened this conference in 1994, at which time I had a blue suit, a white shirt, and black glasses, and we played a strobe light with, thank you, sir. Test. All right, so someone's going to turn this on magically. No, I told you guys in 1994 that you should publish a catalog of vulnerabilities. I mean, this group is as well qualified as any group I know to out the stupidity and criminal negligence of the communications and computing industry. And you didn't listen to me then, and I don't expect you to listen to me now. But I personally think that what the world needs is a really smart consumer reports that outs all the bugs at one place and really talks about this. And I also think we need a national law that requires that application program interfaces be standardized and transparent. Microsoft should not have been. Microsoft should not have been a lawsuit, it should have been a law. Because APIs are the railway, the common gauge of cyberspace. And until you get to APIs, you are going to continue to have Bill Gates as a 900-pound gorilla extracting tribute from everybody. Systrand, for example, is a reasonably decent translation program, but it can only do RTF because they can't afford to pay Bill Gates for the secret handshake that would allow them to do PowerPoint slides and Word documents. Okay? So until we get to standardized APIs, we're basically going to have chaos in cyberspace. That's fundamental. And the Attorney General, not Ashcroft, he was busy putting handkerchiefs over Greek statues. But the Attorney General actually answered by mail. I'm an elected member of the MIT Silicon Valley Hackers Group. Unlike you, those are the guys that are really rich. John Gilmore, employee number 5 from Sun, is one of them. And I go out and talk to them every once in a while. Actually, I listen. And we had a session with John McCartney, the father of artificial intelligence, about this API issue. And he's a brilliant man. And so I sent a letter to the Attorney General that was staffed, coordinated with John McCarthy and a couple of other people. And they actually called me up and said, hey, this is interesting. But then it flopped because they went over to NIST, which is responsible for standards. And it's too hard. I think it should be an internet standard. I think it should be something that Vint Cerf and ICANN and all these guys should be required to promote. Standard, stable APIs that last at least 3 years should be a law. And Bill Gates shouldn't be allowed to release anything until it's been bug checked for 3 years. I don't buy it until it's been out for 3 years. Okay, moving on quickly. So there are 4 threat classes, but how do we spend our money? How do we spend your money and my money? We spend $500 billion a year on that green square. We spend roughly $20 billion a year on that brown square. We spend less than $1 billion a year on that orange square. And we spend about $13 billion a year on the high-tech stuff only. We call it critical infrastructure protection, and we put it in the worst possible place, the FBI. Mike Vadas is a good man. He's spoken at my conference, but they don't know shit about technology. These are the guys that have databases that can be searched one word at a time. Okay? Congress has given the FBI money for information technology repeatedly. And it has been constantly stolen by the managers who had higher priority executive trips and other things that needed funding. Okay? FBI and NSA, a big part of my presentation last time was about NSA being in the 1970s, okay? You really have nothing to fear from NSA when it really gets down to the nitty-gritty. The US government is in the 1970s with technology. It can't talk among itself, and we're about to compound this problem because we're about to tell state and local governments, as well as NATO, that they have to buy in to this command, control, communications, and computing architecture that we have that is incredibly expensive and largely unaffordable by anybody, including the US taxpayer. What we should be doing is migrating the security to the internet and making it software security based so that you can do come as you are, anyone can play ad hoc coalitions at any time. So what we're going to do is we're going to federalize security at the state and local level, which is a massive disaster. You can't do it. It's just pure dumb. Okay, 3 strategic scenarios very quickly, and then I'm almost winding up. What's going to happen in the next few years? Well, there's going to be massive boat lifts and illegal immigrant pushes. In Indonesia, mothers are throwing their children into the ocean in front of Australian naval ratings who are being ordered to stand fast because the mothers believe that throwing their children into the ocean in front of an Australian naval raiding is that child's last hope for living. Of course, it's drowning instead. But you're going to see Indonesia hemorrhage people toward Australia. The British are now regretting the channel because it's a handy little path for Algerians who are trying to crash into the channel and march to England. They can't afford plane fare. So America, Mexico, China, Russia is going to be Asian within 20 years. Brzezinski says this in his book. I forget what the title is, but it's like Grand Strategy. What is it?
Grand Chessboard?
Yes, thank you. Grand Chessboard. God, I love readers. Grand Chessboard. China has an active policy of pushing both legal and illegal immigrants into the Russian space, just as Mexico has an active policy of pushing legal and illegal immigrants into the United States. Now, my mother was born in Colombia, so don't take anything I'm saying as being hostile to immigration. I wouldn't be here if she hadn't married my father and become an American citizen. But we've lost control of our borders. We have lost control of our borders in terms of people and health and ideas and money and the whole bit. Okay? So strategy number 1 is massive immigration. Strategy number 2, Laurie Garrett has a 750-page book on betrayal of trust, the collapse of global public health. Strategy number 2 is we will see certain countries that will have massive outbreaks of Ebola or smallpox or whatever, to the point that there's no one left to bury the dead. Okay, and this is going to spread because the public health system is such that we can't identify this stuff and contain it before it moves. Okay, and any of you that are sleeping with German businessmen, be aware that one of them at least has probably had a sexual vacation in Eastern Europe where he has been contaminated with a whole bunch of shit. Okay, and if he didn't go to Eastern Europe, he went to Thailand. Actually, Thailand's getting better these days. But the point is, the world, this stuff is just moving around so fast. Yes, sir.
Just a little statistic, private on that. 20% of sexual active people in Leningrad.
20% of sexually active people in Leningrad.
It's an economic zone right close to.
Okay, are infected with AIDS. And they've also got tuberculosis and strep and all these other things. And by the way, if you get put in a Russian prison, you're almost certain to come out with tuberculosis. Immune tuberculosis. That's right. We've created a whole series of diseases that are now not only immune to antibiotics, they're immune to freezers. Okay, they're temperature resistant. Okay, now, what's the third scenario? The third scenario is we spend some serious money on all of this, which is national security at its root. And that's not something that this president or any president so far is willing to consider. But we have to change our fund. Now, how did we fail? The red square is the world of information. I divided up into digital, analog, and oral unpublished. Then I divided up into English and all these other languages. That's as informed a slide as you're ever going to see on what our intelligence community can and cannot do. It sucks. You are being badly served by the U.S. government. You should be pissed off. And you should be writing to your congressmen and senators telling them that the McCain-Lieberman Independent Commission is a good idea and that anyone running in a congressional race this fall is going to be held accountable for being stupid. Okay? Because this is a goddamn disgrace. Now, we spend $30 to $40 billion a year collecting the 5% of the information that can be stolen. The National Foreign Intelligence Program allocates $150 million, 0.5% of the lowest public estimate of what we spend on intelligence, for what's called open source information in 29 languages. We actually only do about 5 or 6 really well. And the Director of Central Intelligence has been quoted to me as having said, "I will not legitimize open source intelligence as a discipline. We're in the business of collecting and producing secrets." Ouch. You know, Washington is totally out of touch with reality. And Herb Herb Myers said this when he was Bill Casey's assistant. Herb Myers is the author of Real World Intelligence. He was a Fortune editor. In Persico's book about Casey, Myers talks about 15 years ago, he says the DO, the Director of Operations, which I would like to see become competent one day, which I was a member of, they only believe in information they can steal. Herb Myers says they're out of touch with reality. This is a fact. This is a fact. The US government is operating on roughly 2% of the available relevant foreign information because of this massive disconnect between money assigned to secrets and no money assigned to open sources, and the proven process of intelligence, which is very, very good, not being practiced by the various departments, defense, commerce, and so on. So what do we do with this 2% of the information? We don't process it. We don't process it in any one place. There is no single central processing network in the United States government. In fact, one of the reasons we're on 2% is because 80% of what we do collect in our embassies overseas is sent by pouch. That's those big orange bags with diplomatic couriers. It's sent by pouch back to the corresponding action officer in the corresponding agency, who promptly puts it in a shoebox and forgets it ever existed. It's not in a digital electronic environment where it's readily available to the public that paid for it, or to the rest of the government or whatnot. Okay, and this is the relative value of the various disciplines. That's open source intelligence, human clandestine intelligence, imagery intelligence, signals intelligence, and measurements and signals intelligence. And we can do more on that later. So what's the new craft of intelligence, which my second book is all about? And I repeat, for every book bought between now and, let's say, Wednesday at midnight, I will send Eric a free matching copy. You guys put your claims into him. He knows you better than I do. The new craft of intelligence recognizes that in the age of distributed, multicultural, multilingual information, we really need to get our shit together. We can't be blind, dumb, and ignorant anymore. So lessons of history. I read a book by the RAND Corporation called Anticipating Ethnic Conflict, a 175-page book with no index, no footnotes, no bibliography, and in the course of 175 pages on anticipating ethnic conflict, it managed to avoid mentioning the word history once. This is quite astonishing. I read the book twice, the second time solely looking for the word history. How can you be that stupid? But that's what your taxpayer dollar is paying for, is shit like that. So lessons of history, and I've got a plan to actually go out and get Islamic history and Chinese history and so on, and slice the spines and digitize it and index it and get it in there. Global coverage. CIA does what's called hard target coverage, which is we decide who we really fear. And until 9/11, that was the Russians, the Chinese, and India-Pakistan nuclear conflict in North Korea. And we're apparently still delusional about Cuba being a threat. Okay. And we spend all of your taxpayer money on those 5 or 6 targets, and we don't do what's called global coverage. Well, it turns out most of the threats in the world start in festering sinkholes like Somalia and Haiti and Burundi and Rwanda and Indonesia. We don't spend serious money in those countries. Now, I don't think we can do that by ourselves, but what we can do is we can create a web-based distributed burden sharing system so that at a basic level we share with the Netherlands and other countries, Australia, England, and so on, an open source situation with universities and corporations and others participating. So you basically matrix out the whole thing, and every player takes one box. And that box then becomes part of a processed information commons. And I'll leave that for later after Akil has spoken. We have to harness the distributed intelligence of the United States, of each nation. One of the problems in Washington is we only talk to people with whom we have incestuous relationships that have established clearances. Think about that for a minute. All right? By and large, the people that are consulting to the intelligence community as well as to the rest of the government are good old boys with security clearances who have never been overseas or haven't been overseas in the last 20 years, haven't actually done original work in the language. We don't like academics because we think they're flaky. They don't like us because we want them to pass a lifestyle polygraph, and they have issues with that. So what we've done is we've cut ourselves off from everybody that knows anything. I mean, I'm leaning to hyperbole here to make a point, which is why I also wore a suit tonight, to make a point. By the way, this is a badge. You're all under arrest. Just kidding. But we've cut ourselves off. I mean, when I look at Afghanistan, I can instantly identify the top 100 people. It includes about 10 people in the US. It includes a bunch of French and Italians and a couple of Russians. The Poles, the Norwegians, the Swedes, the South Africans. You know, it's amazing, the little centers of expertise. And citation analysis basically means that you've published something that is so well regarded by others that it's been quoted a lot in official publications, peer-reviewed journals, and so on. After 10 years of trying to get them to create a living directory of the top experts on every country and issue in the world, I've still failed. I stand before you as a failure. The US government is simply not interested in indexing who knows what. Just refuses to do it. Okay? And then last, spies and secrecy. And my first book really details everything that's wrong with spies and secrecy, having been a spy. We still need spies and secrecy. There's still great evil in the world. We still need to be able to penetrate this stuff. But let me take this opportunity to say that I am just absolutely outraged that the US government should presume to declare someone a combatant and strip them of their US citizenship rights. That is a disaster waiting to happen. We're asking John Ashcroft, the man who spends time covering up the breasts on Greek statues, to decide who is an enemy combatant or not. This is a prescription for disaster. Now let me tell you why it's so terrible. In a conventional war, combatants wear uniforms and shoot guns and are real easy to spot, okay? In an undercover war, you don't know. For instance, I could be technically said to have aided bin Laden because I published an article and then a chapter in my book which says how to take down America in 24 hours, okay? I've written the book on how to take any country down. Win Schwartzow, Peter Black, who died recently at a very young age, wrote a wonderful article in Wired on the top 10 targets to take down America. Are we traitors to our country? Does John Ashcroft get the right to label me a traitor to my country and call me a combatant and lock me up without my citizenship rights? That's so scary. It gives you a deeper understanding of US militants and why they fear the US government. Okay? You cannot allow the US government to be out of control like that. And that should be a major issue in the congressional elections. I don't want to get too crazy here and say that Bush should be impeached for failing to respect the Constitution and protect the rights of this single individual citizen. But if Clinton could be impeached for a blowjob, I think this is a lot more important. Actually, I think he was impeached for lying about it. Technically, it wasn't sexual relations. The president was absolutely right. He didn't inhale either. All right, I'm going to skip over this, but this is what a citizen-driven, web-based, open-source intelligence network looks like. And the charts in my second book. But basically, you guys can self-organize. And one of the visions that I have is for every neighborhood to have its own intelligence organization. And I want to be able to type in my zip code and immediately in concentric circles see everything I care about. Disease, water security, food security, public safety, the whole bit. And having seen the situation, which includes trusted reports on what the situation is, which is a whole other issue, discussion that I had with Rob and Andy and a couple of others. I then want to be able to see, okay, who's in charge of this issue and how do I communicate with them? And who else is active on this issue and how do I communicate with them? And last but not least, before every election, I want to be able to print out a scorecard on how these people have done. And I want them to clearly understand that citizens are no longer going to be uninformed and lazy. This is actually a slide that's left over from my conference, but I've written the first 2 books on intelligence and the new craft of intelligence, and I've got another 8 books in planning, the first 3 of which now have, actually the first 4 of which now have guidance committees. And so I'm going to write a book every 2 years about intelligence, a specific intelligence community. My Swedish colleagues are creating a website. And so what we're going to have for each book, let's take law enforcement as an example, because I really treasure and cherish what law enforcement can and should be. For every book, there will be a website which has the book outline. People can sign up and be in the directory of interested parties. They can upload source material. They can actually put pointers to where in the book that's relevant. Then we'll have an expert forum. We'll have a virtual library. And so each of these books is intended to become a living community that then builds bridges to other living communities. Law enforcement intelligence does not talk to national intelligence. That's one of the problems. FBI managers refuse to let Agent Rowley talk to CIA. Okay? It's worse than that. CIA and, as Mike Levine said last night, the FBI and DEA don't talk to each other. The US government is full of incestuous little fiefdoms that in their arrogance believe that they can protect their turf and sacrifice the interests of the US taxpayer. And that's not the desire of the good, well-intentioned people that are actually employees in the US government. That is managers who have been corrupted by power. I recommend to you Norman Cousins' book, The Pathology of Power. All right, that's the end of my structured brief. I hope it hasn't worn you down. What I want to do now is introduce Akil Collins, also known as Abu Mujahid. He has a book, and I and Robert Young Culton have endorsed it. And what I want him to do for the next 20 or 30 minutes is talk about his perception of American intelligence and how it mishandled him. Just like Mike Levine said last night, we mishandle people. And let's see what comes out of that. It's not pre-planned or structured or whatever. And then after that, we'll probably take a 5-minute break, and then we'll do kind of a free-form thing in terms of questions and answers and everything you ever wanted to know about spying but didn't know who to ask. So we'll go on. Please join me in welcoming Akil Collins.
I guess I really want to start with that. You know, if you go back to September and you look at the reason that Bush gave everybody for
Louder?
Can't hear.
It's a technical problem. Audio.
what about now?
Speak up a bit.
Yeah.
Mic is on.
closer.
You just need to speak up. All right, turn on the wireless.
What about this one?
There you go.
Huh? So anyway, you know, when Bush tells everybody that the reason why people are angry with America or want to attack America is that, what was his exact words? They hate our value, democracy, free society, way of life, and, you know, all this stuff. You know, so that's to think that somebody out there in the world, you know, like they love oppression or something, that they want to oppress themselves, as if there's a group of people who sit around coming up with ideas of how can they take away each other's freedom. I mean, there's a lot of weird people in the world, and they have like a lot of weird ideas, and they go about doing things differently. But in the end, I think all of them, whether they're a socialist, an Islamic rebel, communist, or whatever, you know, they want freedom for their family. They just want to be able to, you know, get along in the world. Now, that's not making excuses for terrorism, but if you don't understand what causes people to want to blow things up, to want to attack other people, then how can you fight it? Because if you just think it's for the reasons that he gave us, you know, you're never going to get anywhere. And I guess if they hate America for all of these reasons, then how come, you know, Britain isn't being attacked, France, Australia, and all these other countries that are also free, supposedly democratic, and all of these other things. So, if you look at originally what bin Laden's problem with America was, when he left Afghanistan after the war with the Soviets, he went back to Saudi Arabia, and this was right before the war with Iraq, and he gave the King Fahd of Saudi Arabia a plan. He said, look, you know, you guys don't need America's help. We've got enough combat veterans and enough equipment and stuff to defend Saudi against Iraq or whatever. Anyway, the king told him to take a hike and that he wanted to get America involved. So anyway, bin Laden left and he went to Sudan, and that's when all of a sudden he started becoming a terrorist. Up until this point, he hadn't blown anything up. He hadn't like attacked anybody or anything like that. And then after Sudan, he ended up in Afghanistan, and that's when that's when the embassy started being bombed, the towers in Saudi, the warship, the USS Cole in Yemen, and all these things. So, you know, he it just seems to me like he didn't originally have a problem with America. He used to be on a CIA payroll, for God's sake, you know. And then he ends up as a terrorist. Now, of course, he's committed acts of terrorism, but, you know, why did he start doing these things? Did he really have to start doing them? And today, in my hotel room, they had a thing on the Discovery Channel about the guy Kanzi, who was out front of the CIA headquarters that started shooting people. And they said it almost as if they found it an odd idea that he had a lot of the same grievances that bin Laden has and that other radicals have with America. And well, that's my point, that a lot of people from different backgrounds, different countries have the same grievances with America. And then they had a guy on there, an American, I don't know, prosecutor or government employee, who said, quote, "The message that we're going to send people who kill Americans is that we're going to come after you." Well, that's fine. You know, I don't expect anything different. But my question is, so when America kills other people, whether through bombs or assassinations or whatever, then what? You know, these people don't have a right to feel the same way. He's saying it, I'm going to come after you because you kill American people. Well, you know, the family of 25 people who was just killed at an Afghan wedding, you know, don't their family members feel the same way? We're going to come after you. So, you know, this isn't taking sides. One side is wrong, one side is right. It's just an idea that, you know, you kill somebody's family and they get angry with you. Now, in 93, 94, or 1995, I started out my international travels in Afghanistan and Kashmir, and in 95 I ended up fighting on the side of the Chechen rebels in Chechnya against the Russians. In 1996, after having been wounded and trying to get back into Chechnya again on a second trip, there was a couple incidents that went down, one of them being the tourists that were attacked or killed in Egypt. That made me sit back and, you know, think that maybe me being who I was, having been to the places that I had been, that I could offer some assistance in, fighting terrorism, people being killed in Egypt or whatever. So I approached the American intelligence, being the embassy in Azerbaijan, and I thought that I would approach the CIA and that I would offer what I had to offer, and we would all get down to work. next thing I know, I find myself back in the States working for the FBI. How that happened, I don't really know. But so to make a long story short, altogether I worked for the CIA, and then in the end, joint operations. I'm sorry, with the FBI, and in the end, joint operations with the CIA for almost 4 years. And in 1998, while working on a joint operation with the FBI and the CIA, I was in London, and I received an invitation from bin Laden himself for me to go to his camp in Afghanistan, because obviously he and his people didn't know who I was really working for at the time. They just thought I was a radical figure. I gave the news to my FBI handlers, and I thought that they would be as excited as I was, and the response I got was that I should wait and see what the final answer was about him inviting me, but I wouldn't. Yeah, from headquarters. But I wouldn't get my hopes up too high, whatever that meant. So message came back that a runner had been sent to Afghanistan, that I was officially invited by bin Laden, and I told my handlers about that, and they said it would never happen, to get the thought out of my mind that whatever. And, you know, I pointed out that here was the first American intelligence asset that would, be close to bin Laden. And I don't think I need to tell everyone the things that could have been done with that. And they didn't want to do it. Why? Everyone asked me why. And I wish I had an answer, because it doesn't make any sense to me. After this, I decided, all right, well, I need to take some time off from you guys, because this isn't making a whole lot of sense. Keeping in mind that the whole point of this operation was to send me back to Chechnya, to penetrate a group there that really didn't have any bearing on any international events. It was just a Chechen rebel group fighting against the Russians. So I took some time off, and I went to Kosovo to help the Kosovars fight against the Serbs. And before getting there, I was arrested by Albanian intelligence, and it turned out that they had some information that I was involved in the Nairobi bombing, the embassy that was bombed in Nairobi. This embassy bombing took place, I think, as I was traveling to Kosovo or Albania from London. So, needless to say, I was working for the FBI at the time, and I was with the FBI. Basically, they just end up shitting on you, you know. I don't know how else to put it. And,
Can we turn this back on?
Testing 1, 2, 3. I'll make a couple of comments to put Akil in context. First off, I supported his book, and I'll read you the blurb that I put on the back of the book. This is a moving, detailed, bird's eye view of both the realities of global conflicts in which innocents are called terrorists, in other words, the Chechens. On Russian television, a few weeks ago, I was in Oxford, lecturing at Oxford, and I was with some very senior British intelligence officers, retired. On Russian television, the police caught a bunch of people moving boxes of dynamite into an apartment building in Moscow, and they very grandly announced on TV that they had caught some Chechen terrorists. It turned out it was the Russian KGB. And about 2 weeks later, a major general from the police, sweating bullets, got up and very stiffly read a prepared speech that basically said, we've discovered that this was actually an official state test exercise to see if we were alert. Bullshit. Okay? The Russians are screwing the Chechens, big time. We track 18 genocides worldwide. There are 2 in Russia, the Chechens and the Tatars. There are 3 in Indonesia. There's a bunch. It's a whole chapter in my book from Greg Stanton, genocidewatch.org or .com. So the rest of this reading is, in which innocents are called terrorists while governments do the terrorizing. And of the flagrant inadequacies of the CIA and the FBI, each full of good people. Please, if you remember nothing else, remember that I think that everybody that works for the US government is a good person except for the top managers, okay? The top managers are good people who do not have a passion for their work, all right? They're political schmoozers, rather than serious professionals. And until we have people with a passion for doing intelligence and counterintelligence on behalf of the American community, we're going to continue to have a fucked up bureaucracy across the board. Good people trapped in monstrously politicized bureaucracies. I know and admire this mujahid. He is a loyal American, a faithful Muslim, and a speaker of truth. And then somewhat grandiosely, I say, hear him and weep. Okay, so that's a little over the top. I'm sorry. But it's a good book. And you won't see this book. Now, there's another book that goes with this by Robert Baer, one of the most famous and successful CIA case officers in the Middle Eastern counterterrorist beat. He's written a book called See No Evil. And in that book, which was approved by the CIA's Publications Review Board, which also approved my books, in that book, he states in black and white with documentation throughout that CIA has no serious assets against terrorism worldwide. Okay, you're looking at one of the two people, John Walker being the other, and I think maybe there's a third, who actually got close to bin Laden and his people, and we screwed it up. But Baer says we don't have assets. Now, why don't we have assets worldwide? We don't have assets worldwide because in the early 1990s, the head of clandestine operations, named Ted Price, could not recruit decent people with college degrees. And so he promoted all of the intelligence assistants and reports officers with high school degrees. They became the case officers. Then we had a guy named Dave Cohen who's now blessing New York with his presence, in charge of the New York Police Intelligence Department. He's an analyst by training, not a case officer. And his first few weeks on the job, he says, what's an Axis agent? And we explained to him that an Axis agent is someone that helps us get close to the real target. He says, fire them all, they're not producing intelligence. So we got rid of most of our Axis agents worldwide. And over time, we perpetuated and accelerated a dependency on foreign liaison, which is we ask the people we're supposed to be spying on to tell us what we need to know. Duh. This is really screwed up. Now, I emphasize, everyone who joins CIA and FBI is a patriot that has given up prospects for making more money in the private sector. I was one of two classes that was, they changed the psychological profile from company man, meaning someone who goes along with everything the boss suggests, to self-starter. In both cases, the 1979 class and the 1982 class, 50% of the class quit within 5 years. We simply couldn't put up with the bullshit. And so one of the things we have to think about is how do we migrate toward different kinds of people? And how do we migrate? For instance, the classical case officer is a hip-shooting cowboy with no master's degree. And the classical analyst is an overeducated introvert that has a social IQ of a large rock, like me. And so these are the wrong kinds of people, because what you really need now today is you need a case officer who is very sensitive about dealing with people as multicultural, complex humans rather than slaves who are there for the $1,000 a month or whatever. And you need case officers that have advanced degrees and understand culture and history and have actually read. And you need analysts who can handle people. Because the acme of skill in the 21st century craft of intelligence, and I have 26 new rules which you can get for free by downloading this chapter from OSS.net from the homepage. The acme of skill in the 21st century is not about knowing the answer, it's about knowing who knows. And about putting the customer with a question in touch with the source who has an answer in near real time, and then refereeing the process so that everybody comes out happy. This is a whole new ballgame. We have an industrial age intelligence system. We have a factory intelligence system. And we need to move to a network intelligence system. And unfortunately, we have the wrong managers. We don't have the tools. We have the wrong culture. And the president made a neophyte's mistake, which is he gave more money to intelligence. All right? Giving more money to bad managers makes them worse. It doesn't lead to effective trade-offs and changing the way you do business. And I had this discussion with Doug Smith, who's the deputy director was the deputy director of the National Imagery Mapping Agency. I said, Doug, what do we have to do to fix intelligence? He said, we got to cut the budget. I said, okay, how much do we have to cut the budget by? He said, 1/3. I said, how come? He said, because if you cut the budget by anything less than 1/3, they will continue to make changes on the margin. And they won't fundamentally rethink the way we do business in intelligence and counterintelligence. All right, so you, the American taxpayer, are being screwed because you have a government that doesn't have an effective intelligence or counterintelligence system. It doesn't have an effective diplomatic system, doesn't have an effective foreign assistance system. And oh, by the way, we're giving more money to the same people that missed 9/11 in the first place, so they can do more of what they want. The Pentagon is about to spend $60 billion on more secret satellites that failed to catch 9/11 in the first place. The latest hot thing in the Pentagon is dragonflies and ants. Okay, micro UAVs, micro unmanned aerial vehicles, little dragonflies that send little data streams back, and ants that crawl up your leg and tell you everything they ever wanted to know about you. Now, imagine that as a processing problem. Okay, that shit ain't going to get processed. All right, we don't process what we're getting today from main pipes. There's no way we're going to process all these little things in a coherent system, because among other things, NSA, which has a very good leader who's about to retire. I am going to very much miss Michael Hayden. But General Hayden heard me out when I said that NSA should become the National Processing Agency. That might frighten you a little bit, but there's actually a lot of common sense behind it. Because right now what happens is the US government has all these bits of information, mostly in hard copy, and they don't come together anywhere. We're spending billions of dollars on collection, we're spending almost nothing on processing, and even less on analysis. So we got some issues. Akil, do you have any thoughts on what we should do different? Or if you were president for a day, how would you combat terrorism?
First you have to look at all the foreign policy, everything that America is doing. Some of the things you could change, that would stop pissing people off. Other things, I understand America has to do some things to protect its own interests, to survive in the world. That's fine, but at least, be straight with people about that. If you're in this country over here and it's for oil, tell people it's for oil. Don't say it's for protecting democracy or some stuff like that. At least some people won't be so angry, because they'll be like, well, at least you're being straight with us, the other things, that there's some conflicts in the world that America is obviously backing one side when legally and morally they should not be backing one side. One side is basically committing genocide, is bulldozing homes and shooting preteen children in the head. You don't have to take the other party in the conflict there. You don't have to take their side either, but just stop backing one side over the other, and then you'll stop pissing everybody off. So, I don't know if that makes sense.
Thank you. I don't pretend to understand the Israeli-Palestine conflict, but as a failed rationalist, when I look at Bush's statement on peace in Palestine and stuff like that, I basically say, come on. A serious person would have told the Israelis, look, we love you guys. We pay 17% of your national government budget. 17% of the Israeli government budget is paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. 17%, okay? I said, got a simple message for you guys. I'm going to create a demilitarized zone, and I'm going to put $1 billion a year into reconstructing an independent Palestine state and creating a demilitarized zone. $1 billion a year effective today. And if you don't immediately pull back and turn those settler homes that are invasive over to the Palestinians, I'm going to cut you the fuck off. Okay? If you're Jewish, you may not want to hear that, but I'll tell you something. I personally affiliated with the Jewish group that believes, there's one of them, that believes that we should be more sensible about this. We can't keep doing this. And Saudi Arabia is a despotic regime that is abusing and repressing its people. And Colombia, there's a wonderful little email going around in which the counter-narcotics campaign is actually basically a campaign to try and help the Colombian government eradicate the guerrillas. Well, guess what? The guerrillas are right on most counts, just like the Salvadorans were right on most counts with respect to land reform and so forth. I survived El Salvador. What we have here is a very loosely educated American policy elite that is out of touch with reality, that is not paying attention to intelligence, and is not funding intelligence to the level where it can make sense to them. And we have a bunch of apathetic posers, you guys, who are not voting and orchestrating and organizing, okay? Norman Cousins has a wonderful section in his book on the pathology of power in which he says governments are built to perceive small and intermediate truths. Only the people can perceive the greatest truths. And the greatest truth that we need to perceive today and educate our government on is that there's some really big problems that need a uniformed, consensual national response. And letting Halliburton make billions of dollars so that Cheney's stock options in escrow can go up is not a good idea. So I think right now the American taxpayer is being betrayed. Now let me say, let's have kind of an informal virtual break. Anybody who needs to go to the bathroom, whatever, do so. And we will now start with Akil's help, unless you want to leave. Okay, he's going to the bathroom. And by the way, if you'll notice, he's walking. Okay, that leg has room for all kinds of cool shit. But CIA wasn't willing to work with him on it. Look at all the space that's in there. All right, does anyone have a question about spine? All right. Yeah, he's asking how I feel about Saudi Arabia basically. Look, the limits to growth people had it right 20 years ago. That's right, there's a microphone here, so we'll start using that. How I feel about energy independence? Yep. First off, I think we should let the Saudis hang. Walk away from it. Walk away from it. I also support Brzezinski's view that Turkey and Iran are the linchpins for that region. Yes.
Yeah,
Well, I feel it's true. Among other things, there are fuel-efficient engines that are being locked up in patent protection in order to preserve the oil monopolies. Same thing with paint, polymer paints that are infinitely unscratchable, you know? There's a lot of this shit that's locked up. I think that knowledge that isn't used or put on the market within 3 to 7 years should become public domain knowledge, okay? But until the Greens, the Reform Party, the Libertarians, and Ross Perot get their shit together and actually talk to each other, we are going to continue to be stuck with a Democratic-Republican axis that is not representative of the people, period. Mike, you really got to buy my books, if only for the annotated bibliography. There's a book called The Radical Center by Lind and Halstead, who run the New America Foundation. And they said, for the first time in history, the majority of Americans perceive themselves as independents. Okay, there is a tipping point coming here. I don't know if it will happen in the next presidential election, although I think that George Bush is doing everything he can to get kicked out of office. But there's a tipping point coming here. I don't know what's going to happen in the congressional elections, but I hope that they are an indicator. Let me go to you, ma'am, in the front.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the scoop is on Mideastern women now being used as terrorists. There was something, shahidas, is that what they're called, shahidas?
Well,
And there was supposed to be a training camp even in Virginia.
I'm sorry, Shahid, let me make a sidestep.
Maybe I missed.
He proposed, hang on, I'm going to answer your question. He proposed to the FBI that he set up a training camp for jihad in Arizona. And they blew him off. Well, on CNN today, the latest FBI alert is that they're planning to set up a training plant in Oregon. Okay? I mean, he was years ahead of his time. Because a training camp in Arizona would have been an absolutely super cool place to attract every guy you wanted to look at. Now, on women, Bin Laden and his studs are most willing to use porn sites and other things in order to put steganography, which some of you probably are very familiar with, which is changing the grayscale, as a communications device. Now, women, under the fundamentalist Islam view, are badly mistreated and really looked down on. But this is what's called asymmetric warfare. They've realized that women aren't searched and women aren't controlled, and therefore women make sense. I'll tell you, suicide changes the whole equation. New Orleans will go away if someone blows up one of those oil service boats and takes out the levee. Okay? Levee, whatever. I learned English in a concentration camp. But New Orleans is extremely vulnerable to an oil service boat blowing up or whatever. I mean, that levee is a huge Achilles heel. Los Angeles has some major issues with port security. Most of the rest of the country is built on the premise that we only need to insure against acts of God, not acts of suicidal man or woman. Now, Indonesia is a good case study for women. Ralph Peters, who wrote Will America Triumph? The Fight for the Future. He's kind of our Lawrence of Arabia these days. He just did a long report on Indonesia. And one of the neat things about Indonesia, which is very, very Islamic, is the women don't take any shit from the men. They're very liberated, secular, very much co-equal with the men. And the United States is busy pissing all over Indonesia. I mean, our idea of helping Indonesia is to send a few special forces troops. We really haven't given it some thought. I'll end with one other comment, and I certainly don't mean to pander to the women, although I'm married to one, and she allows me to stay around. The single best investment for taxpayer money overseas is the education of a woman. If you spend $1 educating a woman overseas, it has health implications, energy implications, the whole bit. Michael O'Hanlon wrote about that. All right, please let the next person step forward. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure if this is totally topical, and it's also based on assumption.
I wasn't aware I had been topical at all tonight. Okay, and I hope you guys will direct questions to Akil, too, who went to a lot of trouble to get here.
Also, it's also based on the assumption that there's a problem with media today, it being very centralized and probably interest-driven. What would you recommend from to the general public or for small organizations to...
Pirate radio, to begin with. Howard Rheingold is a friend of mine, and I admire him very much. Howard was the editor of the Whole Earth Review. In fact, my first radical article came out in the Whole Earth Review in fall of 1992, called E3I, Ethics, Ecology, and Evolution, an Alternative Paradigm for National Intelligence. It really concerns me that we've given up the airwaves. We've really, I think citizens basically need to vote in Greens and other responsible representatives of the people, because if you lose control of the airwaves, you've just lost control of your mind. And we need to have neighborhood-based information enterprises that are not only responsive to the neighborhood and representative of the neighborhood's interests, but also in concentric circles can tie the neighborhood into the decisions at the state, national, regional, and global levels.
But you got the self-perpetuated problem right now in terms of, there's the TV for people go for that for world information or whatever information. They're going to the newspapers, which are all being centrally controlled as well.
Well, Noam Chomsky was way ahead of the rest of the world with manufacturing consent and things like that.
Yeah.
I was in Paris one weekend, and I'm now too fat and too old to get into trouble. So I sat in my hotel room because I was stuck between countries and watched CNN for a weekend. It was a terrible experience because they were just recycling crap, very shallow crap. There's a book by McKibben called Missing Information. It's an absolutely lovely book. I review it in I think, my first book. but you can also see all my reviews on Amazon.com. McKibben tape recorded all of the television for 24 hours, and then he looked at it over the course of a year, and then he went out and sat on a Thoreau mountaintop for a day, 24 hours, and he compared the relative value of the two. It's a very, very interesting book. I think consumers and citizens really underestimate their power. You know, look at what McDonald's did once people started saying, we ain't buying your shit unless you get rid of all this plastic stuff. They did it. They listened. People have much more consumer power than they understand. And they have much more vocal power than they understand. And they have much more voting power than they understand. The problem right now is people aren't voting, they're not interested, they're not doing citizen intelligence, they're not doing citizen networking, they're not doing citizen newspapers. And that's where we have to get to. And so the hack is to basically get people back in the business of controlling or at least being able to access the information they need to be good voters. I mean, one of the great things about America is that a vote can still trump corporate corruption. But you got to get out and vote. And I'm really concerned that the Greens will go with Nader again and will not do anything to do outreach to the Reform Party, to Pat Buchanan. I made a comment last night that I don't think any one president or any one party can run this country anymore. You actually have to announce a team approach. And so if I were Ralph Nader, I would get Pat Buchanan on board. I would get Colin Powell on board. And I would announce a team approach to governance. And if you look at the last part of Nader's book on crashing the party, the 10 principles that he outlines there, and I'm going to have to cut you off, next person, but the 10 principles that he outlines there is, all right, I'm going to change my mind very quickly, but the 10 principles that Nader has in the back of his book, that's what we should all be for, whether with or without Nader. Go on.
So other than pirate radio stations and more participation in terms of generating forms of information, you don't have any solutions.
I think you need to take control of your congressmen and your senators, okay?
But you can't do that with the media basically either skewing information or not giving you information.
You can do it door to door. You can do it door to door. It's called asymmetric warfare. Basically, we've got to get out the vote and we've got to get out the volunteers. And that's the bottom line. And you know, there's that old song, give me one man and he'll give me 10 and 10,000 and so on and so forth. One of the reasons I come to these meetings, constantly surprised that I'm invited back, is that you refresh me. I mean, this is a great bunch of people, including all my Fed friends in the audience. This is a great bunch of people, and you ought to do more. And I'm really irritated with the media for not being here, but you're either boring or threatening from their perception. All right, next person.
Very brief question. What you stated is that we're living right now in an information society, and so information is paramount. Could you elaborate on the methodics of actually making decisions and how you outline
Sure.
100 influential people?
Well, okay, let me do this in 3 quick pieces. First off, the intelligence and counterintelligence process really are good. They work. Now, the intelligence process, which I described briefly in the second book, basically is requirements definition. What is it you need to know? Then collection management. Where can you find out this information and what's the validity and so forth of the sources? And then source fusion, multi-source fusion into an analytic product that answers your question that's actionable intelligence. And then finally dissemination, which usually, in the case of a busy person, means it can be no more than a 5-minute video or a 1-page report. And so, of course, CIA spends all its time putting together really big reports that nobody ever reads. The dirty little secret about the $30 billion we spend is not only do we not process 90% of it, but the 10% of it that we do process is basically unread by anybody that matters. Colin Powell has canceled his intelligence morning brief, saying it's useless to him. There are a number of cabinet secretaries that have canceled their CIA briefings because they don't see the relevance to their work. Because we still are focused on 5 or 6 major targets and one customer, the President of the United States, who admittedly, I'm sorry, this is a really cheap shot, who admittedly needs a $30 billion remedial education program. But that was unforgivable. I'm so ashamed of myself. But the intelligence process works, okay? Now, what passes for analysis today in the private sector really sucks. I mean, we've all seen the disclosures about industry analysts being corrupt people who were not doing their homework, who were basically exploding the customer, as Michael Lewis wrote in Liar's Poker, which is a very good exposure several years ago. The intelligence process works. The counterintelligence process works if it's done properly. And one of the things that people don't understand about terrorism is that citizens are absolutely essential for counterterrorism. I was assigned over a weekend to go down and blow up the Supreme Allied Command Atlantic, in theory. In other words, so I went in, I did everything, took pictures of the generals' houses, they were all listed in the phone book, and over the course of a weekend created a 2-page plan for basically blowing up the Roosevelt aircraft carrier with cigarette boats, which no Navy can stop, cigarette boats loaded with explosives and a nice shaped, metal cone charge. And taking out Sackland headquarters at 7 in the morning, and they freaked. And I blew up the Hampton Roads Tunnel while I was at it. This is asymmetric. Now, as I was going in and taking my pictures and doing this very hostile, intrusive kind of thing, I was keeping careful track of who saw me. A waitress on her cigarette break outside of the Fisherman's Wharf restaurant saw me taking pictures of the aircraft carrier. A NATO security guard saw me loading up gas at a gas station that was closed. On a Sunday. Now, I have to be fair. It would take credit cards, so I was pumping gas. But the point is, I kept track of who was seeing me. And well, all those people, A, they didn't know what to look for. B, they didn't know who to tell. And C, if you do tell them, like the flight instructor who called the FBI and said, this guy wants to learn how to fly into the World Trade Center. And there was a movie actor that saw these guys in first class casing the front end of the compartment. The FBI didn't want to deal with that. So what we have here is a huge disconnect. The public needs to be educated. In fact, if you look at airport security, I mean, it's easy in hindsight, but in retrospect, what we should have done rather than grounding the entire fleet and panicking the whole country is an immediate FCC message to every plane to announce to all the passengers then in the air, the paradigm has changed. It's no longer be calm, see Cuba. It's now kill the motherfucker or you're dying too. Okay? This is information. Okay? Instead of going through all of this nonsense that has just completely destroyed the American aviation industry, that one little snippet of information, which costs nothing to distribute, could have changed our defensive paradigm. Okay? And that was the difference between the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania and the other two. They had the information from cell phones. I've lost my train of thought. Okay, so the first is the process of intelligence. The second is we are really illiterate and ignorant when it comes to doing legal, ethical, open source intelligence, okay? Not just students, but think tanks now. Reputable think tanks are publishing 40-page motor-mouth opinions with no footnotes, bibliography, or index, and throwing in a couple of appendices of government documents, and they're calling that a book, okay? Academics. I go to the International Studies Association every year trolling for potential employees, and 90% of those people have no original ideas and can't write. It's really scary. Kids in high school now are getting by on internet surfing rather than learning how to use the Social Science Citation Index, which is by the Institute of International Studies. In fact, let me use this as a case study in 6 phone calls. I was asked, am I on here? Okay. I was asked in 1995 to take on the entire U.S. intelligence community by the Aspen Brown Commission. And the test case, which was given to me at 5 o'clock on a Thursday evening, what's going on here?
Off?
Okay, that's off and this is on.
Okay.
Huh? Still on. No, okay, good. The test case, which is instructive, was Burundi. 5 o'clock on a Thursday, they turned to me, they turned to the staff director, Britt Snyder, and they said, okay, by 10 o'clock Monday morning, we'll know everything you've done on Burundi. Well, I was on my way to Las Vegas, interestingly enough, to talk to DEF CON. I like Jeff. I don't go to DEF CON anymore, but I like Jeff and support his work. So I called my assistant, who was still there, told her which 5 faxes to send, and then she sent me a fax with everyone's phone number. And in Las Vegas on a Friday, I made 5 phone calls. LexisNexis. I said, I want the top 10 journalists in the world who have reported from the front lines in Burundi, Rwanda, so that I can immediately arrest them and interrogate them. Okay? So top 10 journalists. Just kidding. There's still something going on here. John, please turn off the microphone. Huh? Is this one? Yeah, right. Okay, so top 10 journalists in the world. This is easy to do. No one does it. Then I called the Institute of Scientific Information, which publishes the Social Science Citation Index and the Science Citation Index. I want the top 10 people in the world who have been cited in peer-reviewed publications as authorities on Burundi, Rwanda. And I got that. Top 10 academics in the world. A couple of US guys, a couple of, get up against the wall.
So essentially it's peer review?
It's, no, that's the second step. Third thing I did was call Jane's Information Group, and I had them put together a tailored binder, which had 1-page orders of battle for each tribe in the conflict, at a time when the government was only looking at the official army wearing uniforms. There's still something wrong here. Can we do something about audio?
I can give you the podium mic and turn off your lapel.
All right. Now this is off.
Take podium mic.
All right. I can follow instructions. Oh. All right. So Jane's did 1-page orders of battle and then also 1-paragraph procedures, right? Then I called Eastview Publications in Minnesota, and all these people are on my website in the open source marketplace, so you can go kind of browse. And they're specialists at getting all of what used to be top secret Russian military maps for the Third World out into the Western world. Well, Russia spent a lot of money on Third World maps because of the wars of liberation. Did you know that your government does not have tactical military maps for 90% of the world? 90% of the world. The best we can do is the 1 to 250 pilot charts. Okay? We don't have tactical 1 to 50s for Somalia, Haiti, Burundi, and all of that stuff. Okay? So he sent all of that stuff, Russian military maps. I called Oxford Analytica, which was started by David Young, who worked with Kissinger on the NSC, and I had them send all these 2-page briefings that they do for executives. And they had done about 20 over the course of 5 years on Burundi and Rwanda, what it meant for the US and foreign relations and capitalism and the UN and so on. And last but not least, belatedly, because I didn't know them that day, but about 2 weeks later, I called Spot Image in France. And it turned out they had 100% of Burundi, commercial imagery, cloud-free, less than 3 years old, at the 1 to 50 level, which is what you need for tech. This is 6 phone calls. The CIA had the World Factbook and one of those cute little color-coded maps of the region. Okay? Now, no disrespect to my colleagues at CIA, because they're good people who are basically suffering under a monstrously tyrannical system that is seriously perverted in terms of its priorities and its methods and its views of what needs to be done for intelligence. So knowing who knows and being able to make those phone calls and get that stuff in near real time is what really matters. But we don't do that. We have an industrial era system. Last but not least, you got to be able to mesh. The internet is a starting point. Commercial premium services, and if you're not using Factiva Dialog and LexisNexis, you're not serious. You have to be able to go for gray literature in foreign languages. Gray literature is limited edition publications that are legally and ethically available, but you have to know they exist and you have to know where to go to get them. Okay? We don't do that because embassies don't go out looking for stuff. The only people in a U.S. official installation overseas that have the money with which to buy local knowledge are the spies. And they require that you commit treason as a condition of employment. Okay? This makes no sense at all. If you had $100,000 to $200,000 for each embassy and they had a little analytics cell that could buy open source intelligence, gray literature, the whole bit, we could increase what we know about the world by an order of magnitude. Okay? And then finally, you have experts on demand, which is, it's impossible to have an expert on left-handed Lithuanians with earwax problems. Okay? But there's going to come a day when you need one, and you have to be able to go get that expert and use them. As I routinely, for under $6,000, I will go find the world's top expert on the Zeeman effect, which is really cool. You can detect underground facilities from outer space by detecting electromagnetic variations in the Earth that suggest that there's a lot of power underground. DNA signatures, living tissues, which is put the dog's nose in a box so you don't have to feed it or collect the poop. This is really good stuff. And for under $6,000, $2,000 to find them, because it costs $1,000 to do this dialogue ranking thing. $500 for the database time and $500 for the analyst time, 4 hours. You just put all that together. And then last but not least, the tools suck. One of the neatest things CIA ever did was called Computer-Aided Tools for the Analysis of S&T, Catalyst. And it had 3 tiers. It had the desktop publishing tier, and then it had the decision support tier, which was modeling and simulation and judgments and all of this stuff. And then it had the data entry and conversion thing, which was geospatial and video and audio and how do you make all that work, including translation. Well, in 1987, when this idea came to maturity and it was being piloted by Gordon Naylor in the Office of Scientific and Weapons Research, he was spending $8 million a year on Sun and Next workstations. He was doing object-oriented programming. And CIA made a corporate decision that they would go with the PS2 and the secretly neurotic architecture. They turned themselves stupid overnight. Okay, and they literally blew away the opportunity to create analytic tools that would have had an order of magnitude impact on CIA analysis. Now, they're doing some good things today in terms of thinking about analytic tradecraft and how do you do really good analysis, because right now we don't do a lot of analysis in the US or anywhere else. It's really, a lot of this stuff is fly-by-night stuff. So you put those things together. You put the process of intelligence together. You put this internet through gray literature and experts on demand thing. Oh, by the way, when you talk to an expert, you shouldn't have to require that they go through a lifestyle polygraph. And Akil mentioned this. One of the problems we have is that we don't like to work with people who aren't recruited agents who have passed a polygraph. There's lots of stuff you can do as a straight up one-time business proposition. I guarantee you, for $1 million, I can get an audio device anywhere. Okay? And I have not found anyone who turns me down when I offer them $2,000 a day for weekends work. We're just not thinking out of the box here. So I hope that very long answer satisfies you. I will ask, yes, quick question for Akil because I want to respect his presence here.
As a man who has taken up arms for a cause that you consider just, and I think you could be called a good specialist on how transparent world borders are. How serious do you think the interior threat to the United States is? How many actual combatants we're dealing with, and what is the magnitude of the threat?
Outside? You mean outside threats, like in
Inside
Afghanistan?
the US.
How many enemies do we have inside right now in the state?
Outside the Beltway. Sorry, cheap shot. This is my worst ever.
Outside the Beltway, not too many. No, really, honestly, there's not, all the sleeper cells that they talk about and these things. I mean, there's actual sleeper cells that have been sent here under order or something. I mean, really, honestly, they number probably, 5, 6 guys here or there. Then there's other groups of people that I'm sure are just, upset with the way things are going, and they might hook up with a friend, and they're potentially dangerous. But then, you have that with, militia groups and everything else. So, but actual, serious threats, I mean, not very many. That's not the stage that we're in right now. It might get worse later, but right now I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Here in Columbia, one of the problems is random terrorism. Here in New York City, a Columbia University professor was killed by a couple of Islamics a few years ago. And my basic feeling was they got all hopped up over one of these sermons. There was a very good PBS documentary done on mullah sermons in the United States inciting Islam adherents to kill Americans. Maybe we should not let them do that.
That was going on for 10 years, actually. More
Yes, exactly. But see, we don't do foreign languages. I tell you, the biggest counterintelligence mistake in history, and I've got a table which outlines the 5 policy failures and 6 intelligence failures that led to 9/11. After the first World Trade Center bombing here in New York City, the screwed up car bombing, the FBI captured an entire house full of documentation. And they didn't translate it. They didn't read it. Because they had one guy in the New York field office responsible for Arabic, and he didn't want to do it, and they didn't have the $250,000 that they needed in the budget to actually outsource it to the private sector. And it never occurred to them to just digitize it and post it on the net and ask for volunteers, okay? So as a result, we had a treasure trove. And we also had the same thing after the guy blew himself up in the Philippines. We've had some French arrests. We had a whole bunch of stuff. None of this stuff has been translated or read. We're clueless. We need a different model here. We need a different kind of person. We need a whole different approach. And I'm afraid, I'm very concerned that it's going to take another 5,000 body bags before we get it. And that's not original to me. Someone else said that when Condi Rice had someone going through Washington doing a review. We're in seriously deep shit because we're very, very vulnerable. Okay, next person.
I have, I guess, a question for each of you, if possible. First, for you, Mr. Steele.
Robert. Yeah.
Robert, Mr. Robert Steele.
Bear.
I assume the answer is that it's in your books, and that's fine. Maybe that's what I'm looking for.
Or it's in the 10,000 pages of free information on my website.
Do you address, or how would you address the idea, if I understand you correctly, that you're going to have an open source, or rather an open community-based intelligence service that comprises any number of...
Not me, you. We the people.
You're also going to have secrets and national intelligence as well. Presumably there's going to be a border between where secret and public, open and closed is. Who arbitrates that border? And within the border of the secret and the closed, why won't there be the same problems that you elucidate, that you enumerate within the intelligence services today?
One of the most revolutionary developments I think that's come along is peer-to-peer computing. I'm really waiting to see that mature. Sunshine does a lot of good. And one of the interesting things about open source intelligence is that roughly 80% of what you need to know to do good foreign policy, for example, is unclassified. But we're not reading it. I mean, 90% of what we need to know to do good foreign policy on Arabic countries, for example, we don't know because we're not reading the newspapers, we're not attending the mosques, we're not putting it all into a digital thing that can be farmed out. So the first layer, and you saw my chart with lessons of history, okay, we're ignorant. Dutch intelligence service is still talking about the young CIA analyst that came sweeping into Holland about 4 years ago. No, actually about 1992 or 93. She was the analyst, the analyst, not the case officer for the Netherlands, and she came sweeping in like the Queen of Sheba and thought that because she was CIA's point person for the Netherlands that she was a goddess. She didn't speak Dutch. She had never read any Dutch history or Dutch culture or whatever. And in 15 minutes, they slammed the door on her. And they're still talking about it. We can't do that kind of stuff. We really have to get serious about the quality of personnel at the top. And that means you have to hire at mid-career. In my world, you don't get to touch secrets until you've proven that you're one of the top 10 Americans in that domain area. Okay, so you have to be a reputable top person on Somalia before I'll share secrets with you. But that's against the bureaucratic regulations which require that you be under 35.
And not have ever lived next door to a communist.
And not have lived next door to a communist or smoked dope or done any of those other things that we allow presidents but not employees to do. In fact, we've now had 2 druggy presidents. So I guess the standards are loosening. The key thing here is in a distributed intelligence system, all of the good that comes out of public scrutiny and public collaboration works. Now, Rob Gongrich and Andy Mueller just totally trashed my idea for a virtual intelligence community. Rob's the guy who does Hacktick and Andy's the Chaos ICANN guy. I'm still waiting to see if he wears a suit to ICANN meetings. I'm sure he doesn't. But they said it'll never work because they're worried about deception. They're worried about false information. They're worried that, let's say we set up a working group on oil independence. They're worried that the oil companies will then flood that with information that will then create a distorted picture. I don't think that's a valid objection. I think that we're smart enough to have trusted moderators and distributed alternative competing viewpoints that ultimately coalesce. What we haven't done is got the World Wide Web virtual library, which is extremely rudimentary. And it focuses only on links, and you have to do the work. Okay, it's like these new modern military rations. I was in the Marine Corps Infantry, and God, I would die for a can of peaches, you know, or any of the fruit cocktail especially. I really like that. Well, now we have all these dehydrated rations because they're lightweight, mixed with water. You carry the water. Okay? Same thing with the virtual, with the World Wide Web. Go after all these links, you have to do the reading. So what we have to do is create a public intelligence agency. We have to create a distributed virtual intelligence community where neighborhoods have their own trusted moderators and topics have their trusted masters. And you earn, you know, just like Amazon.com grading books, you have to earn different kinds of respect. And over time, I believe we can create, using the web, a distributed intelligence community so that when George Bush comes out and says something really, really dumb, there is an immediate response, which basically says this is the people's view. And it's communicated to these representatives. Now, the cyber advocacy brief that I recommended to you guys from Pinkham, from PAC.org, really talks about how some groups are starting to do this pretty well. AFL-CIO, the National Rifle Association, a few others. But what hasn't happened is no one has gotten it down to zip code specificity. And one of the reasons, and one of the most important new rules for intelligence is because none of our data has geospatial tags. We need an XML geo standard so that every data from any medium has a time and space identity, a time and place identity. Once you do that as a national or international standard, you immediately get to where you can say, show me everything there is about this square kilometer in this time frame. And then you can get to an analytical report, which is then validated by people who read it and have their own knowledge. And ultimately, you end up creating a citizens intelligence agency that uses legal and ethical sources and methods to arrive at informed judgments. And that also shares the burden. Okay? Did you have a question for him?
I did. How the heck did you end up fighting for the Chechens? What's your background? How did it come about?
I'll buy the book.
Is that available still? I thought that
Yes, it's on Amazon.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful book, and I endorsed it because it's a wonderful book. Okay. We'll get to every question, no matter how long it takes.
You mentioned about the failure of the intelligence organizations in the U.S. taking advantage of all of the information and analyzing it. I was wondering, is there any organization in other countries, in Europe, in England, Israel, Egypt, any of these countries that we could look at as an example of how to do this right?
Well, no one agency or country, was it you that sent me the email? No, okay, someone else sent me an email with William Sapphire's list of best dressed intelligence agencies. And so I've been thinking about this a little bit. No one community gets it right across the board. In fact, the Americans, people seem to forget, is the newest intelligence community in the world. Okay, we're the new guys on the block. The Brits do very good analysis. The Israelis do very good prisoner interrogation. The Israelis do very, very good. Well, actually, I don't think they torture as much as you might believe. I mean, they've got dumb soldiers just like we have dumb cops. But by and large, I think torture doesn't work. Arresting their relatives works, which is a Syrian practice. But they do very, very good behind-the-lines telephone taps. They'll send teams into Egypt and Jordan, and I've reviewed one of the books on Israeli military intelligence, and I think they do a lot of things at the tactical level very well. The French are extremely good at using second-generation Arabs. The Americans have a reluctance to take second-generation Arabs because we like them, you know, third generation, whatever. We've actually gotten much worse at the business of intelligence in the last 50 years, I think, because of our dependence on collection technology and our lack of investment in processing and our complete lack of investment in human intelligence, including analysis. We've basically treated our people as interchangeable, expendable cogs in a much larger machine. And at the end of the day, the new craft of intelligence is about really smart, culturally tuned in, multilingual people that have their shit together. And unfortunately, the ones that we have are suppressed, repressed, exploited, abused. I attended the Intelligence Producer Consumer course at CA as part of something I was doing in 1986. And I had analysts in a class complaining that if they read a book at their desk, they were considered to be slacking. They were only supposed to read secrets, okay? So you have some real cultural issues. Now, there is a project taking shape that may receive funding from a New York foundation. And if anyone is interested in putting us in touch with other foundations or contributors, what we have in mind is precisely this. Going out to retired senior executives from the many foreign intelligence agencies around the world and asking them for success stories and asking them for specifics about what kinds of people really work best. I mean, Michael Levin is a good example of a good street guy who will absolutely never survive if he's required to work in Washington. I'm an example, the pseudo side of a failure. In terms of working with bureaucrats who want me to be stupid for most of the time. Bosses who don't appreciate independence. And so over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, we're planning to basically create metrics for success in every aspect of collection, analysis, covert action, and counterintelligence, which includes counterterrorism. And we're going to publish those metrics, and we're going to create a congressional project. And then we're going to set about evaluating the United States intelligence community publicly against those metrics. And we are going to basically be a real pain in the ass for the next 10 years. And I'm looking forward to dedicating my next 10 years to that project and to the 8 books that I have planned. So there is hope. But I think one of the things, thank you, if I survive, one of the things that I think we need to do is create a public intelligence network that is very structured, although independent and distributed. I mean, you need to be able to have a reliable place where you can go to evaluate U.S. foreign policy and spending on Somalia or Chechnya or whatever. And one of the people, the other person that endorsed this book is Robert Young Pelton, who wrote the book, the guidebook, The World's Most Dangerous Places. One of the problems we have is that most embassies and most journalists are reporting third hand. They haven't actually been to the combat zone. They can't actually tell that the Chechens are being bombed into oblivion, having never done anything against the Russians, okay? And so we have all this media distorted stuff. And so you end up actually having to move to where you have, I mean, I love this Nokia camera, you know, the cell phone with the camera. The day is going to come when every citizen is armed with a wireless camera, and shit's going to happen, and there's going to be a geospatial notice, and 100 Nokia cameras are going to be going, you know, and then that's all going to be processed back into a pirate radio, a pirate TV thing, and what? Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, power to the people. Okay, technology can give you power.
But couldn't one of the directory projects that already exist for the web be utilized for this as the basis for the intelligence?
The short answer is yes, but the long answer is no, because everybody is still thinking in terms of connecting to text. And what I have found in 10 years is that the text is only the beginning. What you actually need is a weekly intelligence report on that topic that is kind of the standard. That's the global standard. And if you want to have your own intelligence report, that's fine. And over time, you guys can fight it out, and ultimately one will win. But that's only the beginning of the process. You then need distance learning modules, because when I look at professional email lists and stuff like that, for instance, the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals, skip.org, their forum consists of 90% of the people saying, "Hi, I'm new. How do I wipe my butt?" And the 10% that actually know something have unsubscribed. So you need distance learning modules that raise the standard for being able to open your mouth, okay? You need an expert forum that is moderated and could even be at multiple levels of classification. For example, I have a patent in progress for something that allows you to read a forum at whatever level you're cleared to. And your response then can go in at whatever level you want. It's actually kind of like color-coded. So for example, if you're discussing arsenic in Bangladesh water, this is highly relevant to Coca-Cola, okay? And so you could have the private sector discussing arsenic in Bangladesh water at the unclassified level, and then there could come in a classified report that says this is because there is a Russian toxic dumping program going on. And the point is, no expert should have to go to 16 different forums in order to grab the information at multiple levels of classification or multiple source sharing agreements. One of our biggest time wasters right now is we have bilateral agreements with everybody, and we don't have multilateral agreements. So the Brits and the French, for example, we pretend that we're telling them stuff individually when in fact we're simply going door to door and repeating the process. So we need to massively move toward multilateral information sharing at multiple levels of classification. And then over time we'll get to it. I'll tell you what is good. What is good is that the internet has changed the world. The internet and peer-to-peer computing have irrevocably altered the power relationship between the people and the corporations. I mean, among other things, I would eliminate personal status for corporations. They should not be treated as individuals. But we can do that. We can do that. And I believe that the United States of America is the place where it will happen. It's going to take 10 to 20 years. This is not an easy fight. This is a really long uphill battle. And while Lori Wallach is off managing riots in Seattle, I want to be working on a public intelligence agency that can actually out all these people in their own neighborhoods. Okay? I want to embarrass corporate executives in their own neighborhoods with direct mail to their neighbors. Okay? Telling the truth about what it is they're doing. All right, let's go on to someone else. Do you have anything you want to say?
Yes, sir. Hello. My name is Jeffrey Smith, and I want to tell you that your talk here has been a breath of fresh air. As far as your associate here, I can just say to you this. The number of people who have come forward to both police intelligence and public safety in this country and have put themselves on the line, have selflessly done this, and have been terribly abused is a legion of people. The number of people over the last, say, 30 years, of them, some of the most valuable minds that have entered intelligence, who have been discouraged by just what he's saying, believe me.
And Mike Levine also.
Yes, exactly. Just what he's saying. The bureaucracy has ground down hundreds of our most valuable human weapons for public safety. He's absolutely right. He's also absolutely right that if we could distribute this, if we could have more public involvement, it would crush the bureaucracy's stranglehold. However, there is something I do have to take serious issue with you.
I'm ready.
You know it's coming. Your overview is wrong and limited and fatally flawed in a number of ways. First of all, why the hell do you think this is all happening? Because the bureaucracy is doing it on its own? Listen, forget about us being surrounded by enemies. America's problems, understand this, America's problems are on the island of Manhattan. It's the characters here, like the Council on Foreign Relations, like the Trilateral Commission, like the Lucis Trust, all these people that generations of patriotic organizations have been yelling about for maybe 40 years.
Okay, I got it. And you're going to have to stop.
Okay.
You got the message. And if you want to talk to me again after I've had a really stiff drink, I will be here for the rest of the night.
I tell you what, I invite you tomorrow at 12 o'clock. No, tomorrow at 12 o'clock.
I don't have time. I'm on an airplane.
Okay,
Bear
fine.
at oss.net. Okay, next.
Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for being here. You realize how hard it is to find this many of you in one spot that actually think I might be right? Next person.
Hi, I'm Rosathelia.
Hi.
Known as Big Bertha on Emmanuel's show. Sometimes I call him. One question to you, one question to the Mujahideen. The question, well, two-part question. One, this failure to the WTC, both 93 and 2001, like GM and Ford had planned obsolescence, and you make the factory analogy. Could this be planned ignorance?
Look, Chomsky was there way before all of us, yes.
And what are they setting us up for if Manhattan gets hit again?
Manhattan will be hit again.
What do you think the political landscape would look like? Do you think anyone in this room would not be in an internment camp? Anyone?
No. Let's not go there. Let's go with information.
Okay.
The WTO and the IMF have the wrong economic models, and I'm not an economic expert, but I believe in some computing project. I was the officer in charge of creating new advanced artificial intelligence applications for clandestine operations. And so I was looking at linking people in text, so that if you need someone, when you do an audio operation, you need a safe housekeeper because you've got like a 200 to 500 meter path loss thing. So you got to have a receiver real close. So how do you identify a safe housekeeper who is known to someone who is known to someone who is known to someone who already works for you? In other words, how do you find a path between people? And I did all of this stuff. And I realized that the 5th generation project in Japan was worth penetrating. So I went to the Japanese desk in the DO and I said, hey, I've gotten real smart about computers and what's worth stealing and all this stuff. I said, how about I learn Japanese and I go penetrate the 5th generation project? And they said, no, not interested. We really don't care about computers. Okay? I guarantee you Walker was not a CIA operation. Among other things, we don't like 18-year-olds with no college degree. I'm fairly certain he was, like my friend here, independently inspired. And
so basically, I could go to Afghanistan now if I had the money and just try and join a terrorist group?
You'd run the risk of, number one, being shot. Number two...
Why wasn't he shot?
Because he was for real. They're not stupid.
He wasn't for... Wait a minute. How can they tell whether you're for real or not?
You prove yourself. I mean, one of the problems we have is that we're not allowed to handle people who kill Americans. And one of the first tests for somebody is go kill an American. Show us you're serious.
So basically, he killed an American.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. Look, I've spent 10 years, and after this 10 years, a number of you, I think, are willing to believe that I'm not working for the CIA and that I'm kind of pretty much what I say I am, a reformed spy who really believes in open source intelligence and network citizen stuff. I guarantee you, CIA would never fund me to do this. Now, for the last 10 years, I have run a conference which brings out anywhere from 150 to 800 foreign spies and intelligence analysts to talk to each other about open source intelligence. It's an absolutely brilliant concept for bringing people out and creating new relationships that are outside the official liaison thing. CIA has historically not attended my conference. Okay? And in fact, the FBI has really screwed me over because they were cold pitching my foreigners in their hotel room. Some of my Eastern Europeans were going back into their hotel room and finding an FBI special agent sitting on their bed waiting for them. So I lost a lot of my audience to bullshit like this. If I had known it was happening at the time, I would have sued them. By now, it's burnt bridges, spilled water.
What do you think of these companies that are paying the FBI and CIA just to tell them that there's going to be terrorist attacks when there's not? Just to sell a product? Like
I have no idea. I think you're way over the top on conspiracy theory. Next person. No, actually...
He's not an next person. Maybe I should be a
No, stop. But let me tell you this. The U.S. government is being very, very stupid about how it's spending its money. And yes, a lot of companies, I don't know if you've noticed, but the day after 9/11, there were a whole bunch of Homeland Defense analysis centers that had never existed. And these are cretins that didn't know about this beforehand, and they're just selling the government bullshit. So the taxpayer dollar is not being spent very wisely. Now, I'm going to, you do your question, and then Andy, I want you to ask your question again.
But by the way, did you listen to Jalal mentioning your efforts?
No. Oh, no, because I frankly, I intended to listen to the whole thing, but I got tired of him talking about being screwed over by his friends. So I finally walked out.
I guess he mentioned a very similar point what I said, and that's, I mean, the question obviously is where do you take the trust from that if you enforce the United States government to get a better information processing and a better ability to understand what's going on, where do you take that trust that they use this for the, let's say, peaceful solutions of problems for the whole human race and not for only for commercial, reasons whatsoever. I mean, what's actually happened is they go to all kinds of countries where, let's say, the ability of the governments to act with their citizens is not nice, and they come with arguments like, we need human rights, we need democracy, and so on. And it all sounds very good, but what they mean is market regulation. What they mean is privatization of. Wait, what I mean is privatization of telecommunication, of
privatization
energy,
of water,
everything. Yes. So again, where do you take the trust from that this government, with it just? I mean, there's 2 points here. The one is the tools they use, and the other is the direction they go to.
Part of the problem is that both government and industry are founded on the premise that the people are dumb and not connected, and basically don't need to be consulted, and that the most efficient way to manage the affairs of society are to have a group of elites that do all the thinking for you, and that basically are in charge of common resources like bandwidth and so on. That's history, because now what we have is a smart people who is increasingly connected and able to make its own informed judgments.
But they don't have the possibility. I mean, wait a moment, we already have a situation of patents. We have a situation of, huge amounts of power being concentrated at single points of
and that's
the
what
planet.
we need to change.
And yes, yeah, right, but the question is, you have the kind of people that make the decisions. They're not going to say, oh, you kids out there, oh, you grow up now, you now have better understanding, oh, now you can rule with us.
One of the things
you don't have to be on the icon board to see that only that you're there and that only that you also understand the issues means that you really can make decisions with those guys. I mean, it's a little bit naive.
Look, popular boycotts work. Consumer power works. Votes work. When you get
votes work in the United States. Who elected your president here? Who elected your fucking president? I mean,
yes. Hey, see, one of the interesting things.
I mean, was he elected?
No, he stole his brother. Yes, it works. Corporations respond. In fact, a lot of people have discovered that it's better to go directly after the corporations and not even bother with government. Now, let me answer your question in 2 ways. The first is, I believe we need a lot more foreign language, foreign cultural insight on our decisions. One of the problems that we have is Americans really, I can't even talk about these issues with the adults that are in my Boy Scout troop, because they actually believe what the Missouri Synod believes, which is that these people are all pagans and that we can't respect them. We can't even pray with them. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod just fired the president, like an archbishop, for having done an interfaith service with Muslim clerical leaders. Okay, we have Americans out there that really believe that the rest of the world is basically an annoyance and that we should simply swat them like a fly. And they don't realize that these guys now have asymmetric power that can bring down America. So what I think, Andy, is number one, I think the internet is going to make it possible to create a public intelligence agency. And I think that public intelligence agency will be multicultural in nature. For example, when East Timor or Indonesia falls apart, I expect that the Internet Task Force on East Timor will have a Dutch contingent, a Portuguese contingent, an Indonesian contingent, an Australian, a Philippine, a Malaysian contingent. And out of all of that will come a higher level global intelligence estimate. And even if there are disagreements, they can be footnoted disagreements.
But let me ask you this question. I have a concrete example of what's going on. I have a deaf German hacker called Tron. He was involved in some chip card stories. He was involved in an Israel company owned by a guy called Robert Murdoch, who wanted to hire him, but he didn't want to work for them, but it's a long story. At the end of the day, we found him dead. And we have some investigation running for a few years now because police says it's a suicide. Technically, even the medical people say it can't have been a suicide, but that's not important. Important is I have his parents around. I have, a huge involvement of all kinds of interesting governments, including United States government. I have his mother asking me the question. She asked me, when all these NSA people here make the decisions about what German government does and what not, why can't we vote the American president? And I mean, in a way, it's the right question, because you look at this here from an American perspective. You're asking yourself, wouldn't it be a good idea our government understands other cultures? But for me, it's other way around. It's why is the United States government the central place? Yes, it's a fuck up place, but why is it the central place to make kinds of decisions about other governments? And why shouldn't this be a completely decentralized environment?
I think that, number one, it is an indictment of the American people that Gore didn't have the balls to really go the whole distance. Now, personally, I think Gore would not have been a great president, nor is George Bush a great president. But according to Gary Pabst, who wrote a book called The Best Democracy That Money Can Buy, he's an investigative journalist for The Observer and other English newspapers. He's an American expatriate. He discovered that 50,000 people had been disenfranchised in Florida because Jeb Bush pursued a very deliberate strategy of inviting felon lists from other states, including Texas, and then paying a company $3 million for what used to be a $400,000 job to disenfranchise anyone whose name had an 80% match. Okay. All right. So they disenfranchised 50,000 people. Of those 50,000 people, I think roughly 35,000 were able to get their vote reestablished because they were able to go in and say, look, I'm not a 3-foot dwarf with one arm that you think is this felon. And oh, by the way, in Florida, only people convicted of a Florida felony are supposed to be disenfranchised. So Jeb Bush acted criminally and against the best interests of the American people. And I'm just stunned that he hasn't been held to account for this. I hope that he is never allowed to hold national office. Well, that's true. Well, that's right, and I'm reading Nader's book now, Crashing the Party, and he's changed my mind. I used to think of him as a spoiler who denied Gore's the election, but as he says, it was Gore's election to lose, but more importantly, I think Nader's book really documents the fact that the Republican and the Democratic parties have both sold out completely. They are totally lock, stock, and barrel corporate entities. And I think the American people are smart enough now. I think that Lind and Halstead in their book on the Radical Center, there's another book called The Cultural Creatives, which is about 50,000 people that basically think of all the Oregon and Washington folks that are into sustainable economies and all of that. I think that movement's growing. I don't know if Nader's going to be smart enough to get a coalition of Greens, Reform, Libertarians, and Independents. But if he were smart enough to announce a team in advance that included people like Sam Nunn, who is himself a third party. I mean, Sam Nunn would love to run a third party. Fred Thompson, Colin Powell, who has been seriously disrespected in this administration. And I'm surprised he's putting up with this trash. He's the only guy there that I think has real ethics and integrity and a real understanding of reform. No, Colin Powell should have run for president this time around. As best I understand it from people inside his staff, the reason he didn't run for president is because when Rubin was assassinated in Israel, his wife, who has a nervous condition to begin with, flipped out. She had like a nervous breakdown. And she made him promise that he would never run for president because she was afraid he would be assassinated. by right-wing zealots or whatever in the United States. Personally, I think he'd be a great president if he had a strong team around him. He does tend to be a little bit too corporate in his nature. I mean, he made it the tough way inside of the existing rule system. Questions from anyone? My personal answer is no. My personal answer is that I would vote for Colin Powell if he were to run, period. I mean, among other things, it would break the color barrier on the presidency. He is a man who earned his place in life the hard way. I mean, from the inside by the stupid white men rules. You know, that's another great book, which is if I hadn't read Greg Papp's book first, I think I would have blown off the stupid white men book as just kind of, you know, publicity type stuff. But it tracks with a lot of other very serious books. Yeah. It's good read. It's what I call airplane reading. It's whose list? No. Really? I'd be glad to get an email from you, bear@oss.net. But let me finish my comment here. The Stupid White Men book, there are a lot of books that really track with what he's saying, like Lionel Tiger's Manufacture of Evil. One of the interesting things about Tiger's book is he looks at how the industrial system broke down the bonds of kinship that used to keep people honest. You know, in other words, when cottage industries were kinship based, you basically had a circle of trust. And when you then turned that into an industrial machine, you basically broke that circle of trust. And it got to be, you know, buyer beware kind of stuff. But it tracks with a lot of other books. All right, your question, sir.
Okay. If Colin Powell was to run again, all right, could you possibly, I mean, I know he's Republican.
Yes.
Could he get rid of that?
I honestly don't know. I mean, you know, it really depends. If his wife were to die, I believe he would be liberated. Because I think, you know, no, I mean this in a very respectful and caring way. He is an honorable man who loves his wife and who is respecting her wish that he not place himself at risk of assassination. I'm quite convinced he's a very courageous man, and that if he did not have the concern over his wife's condition, that he would run for president. I hope he would run for president. I'm concerned. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the issues. I think we need a strong American alternative media. One of the points that Nader makes in his book is that if you don't get into the presidential debates, which are now controlled no longer by the League of Women Voters, they are now controlled by a private corporation that was created by the Republicans and the Democrats for the specific purpose of blocking third-party candidates from being a part of the debates. And Nader makes the point in his book that if you don't get into the presidential debates, you don't reach millions and millions of people that you will never be able to touch, no matter how assiduously you campaign. So I personally believe that the American citizens should insist that the League of Women Voters, and also Nader makes the point that there's nothing to keep other debates from taking place. The big problem is attracting the two main contenders, because they have learned that if they deal in sound bites, they get by. And so what the American people need to do is say, we are going to have no less than 6 debates on substantive issues, and each candidate must publish an issue paper on water security, food security, public health, energy, education, citizenship and immigration, and national security. So roughly 7 issue papers. Everybody should be required to publish on the web an issue paper. And then I'd love to see America go back to citizen focus groups and neighborhoods and the whole bit. But right now the American voter is not taken seriously, and they've brought it on themselves. Yes, sir.
I'm not really, I'm sorry. My name is Javier Garzon. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. Some of you that don't know.
Ah, you're one of the victims. Okay.
Yeah, I drove 1,400 miles straight.
That's a long ride. How many hours?
14 hours. Yeah, I made it to New Jersey to a friend's house. But I'm kind of new at this, and it's freaking me out now with the speakers. The biggest, not the biggest thing, but some of the things that bother me is the Republican, and Democrats, and those are the only two you always see.
We need a third choice.
Yeah, and probably a fourth choice.
Well, and I'd even go so far as to say, first off, I think we need to change the voting system so that they do have the instant runoffs, which means you should be able to select a first choice and a second choice for president. And then if your first choice doesn't win, your votes go to the second choice. So that's something that every citizen in the next congressional election should be asking their candidates for Congress, saying, will you commit to doing this as legislation? That's a litmus test.
At this point, wouldn't it be some, at this point, if you took every eligible person in the U.S. to be president, and threw them into a lottery pool, and drew one person to be president, would that person?
No, and part of the reason is that no one person is capable of doing the job. And one of the things I think the Americans need to realize is that who is a cabinet secretary really matters. Rumsfeld, for example, as Secretary of Defense, he surely has the best of intentions, but he is helping run the country into a major deficit. And the Pentagon should have been limited to its existing budget and forced to make trade-off decisions. The State Department needs Colin Powell, but he needs more money. For example, I think my dream would be for Nader, Perot, and Pat Buchanan to agree, and Sam Nunn, to agree to run as a team and to approach Colin Powell very discreetly through someone he really trusts and ask if he would allow his name to be entered as someone who would either remain as Secretary of State for an indefinite period or who would become Vice President or whatever. I think America is ready for an independent team to manage the country. I'm also frankly concerned about term limits. I think we actually need to eliminate term limits for a team. The world is getting too complicated for us to have neophytes in office. And so I don't know what's going to happen.
I just wanted to get exactly to the timing issue as well. There's a book called Blowback.
Yes, excellent book.
What's his name?
Chalmers Johnson.
Right.
He was a very famous scholar of revolution.
Yeah, and I guess he explains 11th of September and everything quite well, and that also, of course, raises the question how much time the United States government still has to improve a little bit.
If I had to guess, I'd say we have...
I mean, you know what I mean.
We
What's
have between
happening
3 and 7 years.
Is that in Europe, of course, it's offensively discussed. If, we have, for example, this international court in Den Haag, you know what happened, and the United States comes there and says, oh, international court for criminal war, yeah, that's a good idea, but we ask for immunity, and then wait, I mean, what happened is, hey, let me explain the issue, and then
all right, raise
my question, and then you give the answer.
I already know the answer, and I already know the issue.
No, you're a little bit too fast, because this is a very America-dominated discussion, and let me give you 1 minute of how from Europe this all looks like.
It looks like shit. I already know that. So
yes, it looks not only like shit, it looks like this needs some help from outside the country. Because how many years you ask us to wait from a European standpoint if we set up something like a Den Haag international, jurisdiction thing, and then United States ask for immunity, and then if the Den Haag people, the Dutch people say, wait a moment, no one gets immunity here. We're talking about criminal activities here, and then United States says, okay, then we're gonna, if the Dutch court will just put one American citizen into prison, then we're gonna send the Marines.
Look.
And from a European standpoint, we ask ourselves, oh, okay, they are insane. Let's forget about talking with them. They are insane. So I mean, honestly, give me the answer where to take the trust from that you're going to be able to fix your government.
Okay, can I give you the answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Andy's my hero. and one of the people I trust. I'm quite serious about that, but he does go on. Okay, now, first off, I actually brought this subject up with some of the adults in my Boy Scout troop, and I was stunned by the answer, which really showed me a lot that I didn't realize. The guy looked me right in the eye and said, we can't do that because the International Tribunal will be stacked with third world countries that are out to get us. That was his answer, okay? Now, that is probably the perception of enough Americans so that the government will not feel compelled to really accept this. But it's kind of a circular problem because there are a lot of third world countries that very rightly believe that we are a threat to their prosperity and security. And that our corporate consumerism, I would distinguish between the American people who have very big hearts and corporate consumerism, which is as we have seen with some recent exposures, really unethical and greedy and absolutely against the best interests of the American people, and government, which is somewhat divorced from the American people, somewhat beholden to the corporate system, generally with the best of intentions, but way, way out of date, completely lost in terms of new ideas and access to foreign information that's relevant. And so what we're really talking about here is a 25-year project to re-educate America and to get back in touch with the real world and to change our government at the local, state, and national levels. This is not easy stuff. And I don't know if it's going to happen. I really don't. But I have 3 boys. And those 3 boys are going to have children. And those children, I hope, will have children. And unless we start doing what the Native Americans call 7th generation thinking as a community, our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren are going to be in deep shit. Yes, and one of the interesting things is kids are growing up with wired brains, but the education system is not doing very well. Someone smarter than me said that we've spent 100 years creating schools to build dummies. I mean, basically our schools beat creativity out of people. No, I mean, creativity is beaten out of you in school. And then when you get to a corporate job, you're expected to we literally have to change the whole paradigm. And I don't know what the answer is other than people deciding they really want to come together in a critical mass. And I'll tell you something, the day that citizens realize how much power they actually have, holy cow. Because you're talking about instant recall of senators being thrown out of office overnight by a massive statewide vote that basically says, you're fired, asshole. I mean, there's a lot of power to be had in the people. Yes, sir. I think every state is different, and I don't know the details, but my general sense is that 300,000 signatures will get you a referendum. Some. Well, it's really challenging. I mean, one of the interesting things about Nader's book is how difficult it is to get these signatures. What's that? Crashing the party. Yes, sir.
Grassroots.com. Grassroots.com.
Grassroots.com. Physical.
Nothing digital is legal behind it.
No, there was a law class that said they were.
Sign the law with his digital signature. Okay, so if that's not.
I'm telling you, as a court case a week ago in North Carolina, they would not allow any evidence that was of email or electronic format, only signed paper documents.
What? Federal court or state?
State.
Well, let's just agree that the issue is still confused. But I do believe, no, but see, if you get to the web, if there's a couple of other books that are really interesting. One's called Imagine, What America Could Be in 20 Years. And it's a really well done book with really good photography. And all of these books are in the bibliography of my second book or on Amazon.com. If you've got an hour and a half and a couple of beers in you, just go through my reviews. Just click down through 294 reviews. It'll take you less than 1 minute per review, so 294 minutes, okay? It'll really give you a good bird's eye view, among other things of my opinion, but of these other books by other authors, because what I was trying to do was build a porthole into a really full range of national security books. But if you can get organized at the neighborhood level, you can use the web to basically say, okay, we need physical signatures, boom. You know, it's just like a telephone calling tree in the military. You know, you call one person and they call two people and then that cascades down. We just haven't gotten organized. But there's no reason why we can't get organized at the neighborhood level. And that goes to kind of a random thought that there are certain themes that run through positive visions of America's future. One is campaign finance reform that is absolute, that basically trashes the corporate ability to buy legislation. The second is restoration of neighborhoods. We need to restore neighborhoods both in urban and rural suburban areas. It's amazing how much of America has been done by developers in ways that are not child-friendly. I mean, they can't bike, That's right, they're car-friendly. So we need to restore neighborhoods, but beyond that, if you restore neighborhoods with respect to food and energy, you achieve some very remarkable things. And one of the things that was in this book that really impressed me is that the Norwegians, among others, have gotten to where they've gotten industrial production down to the neighborhood level, even for extremely complex things. So it can be done. The two books that I recommend in this vein are The Cultural Creative. I have no idea. Question?
I'm going to get off a little subject here. I know you're probably all tired about September 11th, hearing it over and over and over again.
It's going to be with us for a long time.
This is my biggest question, and I contemplate because I'm a little morbid on it, okay? And you have to be. I know there's a lot of people that died and everything. Did America get anything out of it? I mean, did America prosper from the destruction? If it never happened.
No.
In any way.
No.
Money-wise.
I helped Amy Ziegart. Amy Ziegart was Condi Rice's doctoral student, and she wrote a book called Flawed by Design, The Origin of the CIA, NSC, and JCS. And that book got the Alfred White Award for being the best political science dissertation in that year. And Amy came to Washington, and I helped her get a bunch of interviews, and she got others with help from Condi Rice and so on, including John McCain, who said out and out it was an intelligence failure. But one of the people she talked to, and she shared this with me in an email afterwards, said we need another 5,000 body bags. I outraged Fox and Friends, the cable program, by saying that there's no war on terrorism. We're not at war. We're not really waging a war on terrorism. Washington isn't changing anything about the way it does business. I call the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence at 9, 10 in the morning, and no one answers the phone. You know, what 9/11 cost us $20 billion in immediate aftermath effects on the economy. It's costing us $1.2 billion a year for our Afghan presence and our military. It's costing us a national deficit that is rising very rapidly. Each of us owes $66,000 right now for the national debt. It has cost us, because of the nature of the Bush presidency, it has cost us whatever potential it might have had for transforming the way we do business. For example, in my first book, in the President's Chapter, which you can download for free from OSS.net, I say, among other things, that we need a Secretary General for National Security who has complete authority over justice, diplomacy, foreign aid, and the military. Basically, you have to be able to make trade-offs between hard and soft forms of power. We also need a Secretary General for the National Commonwealth who can be in charge of energy and health and education and all of these things. Because what's happened here is we've got too many stovepipes in government. And we need to add, I think, a layer of dominant coordinating authority just below the presidential level.
I don't think it's in here. Becky said she saw it.
So that's one of the thoughts. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, I'd like to hark back to a question I asked last time. I know we were a bit rushed.
No, we're not rushed now.
We're not, okay, so we do have plenty of time now. I don't think I understood your response. I'm not too good at all the political details. I know a little bit.
Let's
but
try it
I
again
know
from the start.
Okay, from the start. Sounds like a good call. As a hacker, I understand what you're trying to do with this open source initiative on like open source information is trying to get everyone involved and have an open framework for creating all this data. But I mean, from the technical point, which I understand the best, that's the part that makes the most sense to me. That's the part I can understand. There's just a whole lot of data.
Yes,
And I don't
okay, good.
understand
I'm
how
really
you
glad
can
to have a chance to go over this
filter.
again. There's three kinds of data: digital, analog, and unpublished. Okay?
Right.
So that's number one. Number two, the data, regardless of its code or its media, so whether it's audio, visual, whether it's PAL or NSC or whatever, any one of these data, whatever, forget those technical details. It's going to be in 29 different languages. Those are the 29 that matter. And then there are actually 3,000 languages spoken today by very small, diverse groups. But let's say 29 languages.
I mean, I understand the enormous
Okay,
diversity
so
of this
that's
data.
huge.
That's
That's
right.
huge. I'm not suggesting that we digitize all of that, and I'm not suggesting that we process all of that. What I'm suggesting is that we have nodes of human expertise that are multicultural and diverse, that basically set themselves up as portals for screening that data and selecting that data, and selectively processing and disseminating that data, and selectively analyzing that data to create a common currency, if you will. And so what you end up doing, taking Indonesia as an example, is you end up creating a distributed cell where the Dutch Intelligence Service, which has real equities here, and the Australian National University and Australian Intelligence Service, and perhaps the Malaysian Intelligence Service and business community, they share the burden of screening stuff and digitizing and putting it into the web. And then essentially you're able to draw on diverse distributed resources in order to dominate this data.
I mean, I guess that sounds interesting.
And you'll have competing views of the data. You'll have
'Cause you'll have
competing
multiple-
versions of reality.
You'll have multiple countries. coordinate.
Absolutely. And,
I mean-
and my vision in the end is that I can enter, let me quickly do this, we've got plenty of time, there's no rush, okay? My vision is that eventually I can say, enter a question about the Spratly Islands and select the Chinese, Vietnamese, Philippine, and Australian point of view for that question. And then thereafter, as I'm interacting with the question, the digest of their view of that answer comes up, so you actually see four completely distinct cultural perspectives on the question you've asked. Go ahead with your question, which I'm sure is related. And we're coming back to you. Well, that was Rob's point, which he was very concerned that if we say created, let's say an environmental website, that then corporations would flood it with disinformation and false analysis and stuff like that. I think we can get around that by having a physical trust presence established. You know, well, when actually there was a very big editorial in the Post, and my wife is beating up on me on this subject because, yeah, and this is right, empowering the people, and you know, Jello was saying that every time corporations put a roadblock in, you know, some teenager finds a way around it. When Peter Black published his article in Wired back in like '92 or so, he was severely criticized for giving the terrorists a playbook, you know, a game plan for taking down America. And Wynne Schwartow and I have been criticized for writing publicly about how to take down America. Well, I'm of two minds on this, I've got two thoughts on this. The first is that you cannot defend America if all of the citizens aren't aware of the vulnerabilities. And basically, using open information is more empowering to the defender than it is to the attacker, because that's my view anyway. And second, if you keep these deficiencies secret, they'll never get work done. I truly regret that another 9/11 will be required, but the American people who have been reading assiduously, I mean, the fact that I'm reviewer number 70 on Amazon.com and I only review serious national security books. I think I have 3 spy novels in there. But that says something about what Americans are reading. They've been reading about terrorism and Islam and all this stuff, and Americans are now engaged in the concept that there's something we don't understand that can really threaten us. However, Americans are too inclined to trust the government to do the right thing at this point. And as a result, we have a government that, with the best of intentions, is wasting billions of dollars and precious time, which cannot be recovered. Time is the one thing you can't buy back. And so, in my humble opinion, with the best of intentions, the U.S. government is screwing up big time in terms of getting us ready for the long haul. Go on now.
Going back to how you presented your open source information initiative, I mean, the part that refers to America specifically sounds like what America is doing right now. So, I mean, that does seem like the best way to go about things. Of course, to have specializations in particular fields, and I imagine that's what they do now.
But see, the problem is that the specialists aren't being listened to. For example, when the U.S. government makes a decision on Afghanistan, they haven't actually read all the Dari, Pashto, and Farsi information to begin with. So they really don't have a good base of the historical, cultural, and current environment. That's number one. Number two, your core analysts responsible for Afghanistan are generally kept too busy answering stupid questions from senior officers to actually do any reflection. And so they're basically forced to generate reports and stuff like that. Number three, we don't have money in the budget for paying experts. And so, for example, while the Afghan task force may be able to call on 2 or 3 Afghan experts, there's actually one, I forget his name, but he wrote a book called Sources of Conflict, which I trashed because it had no index, no bibliography, no footnotes, and was very American-centric. He said the future of Asia will be determined by what the Americans want to do in Asia. But basically, he is the authority on Afghanistan for the National Security Council. They don't look any further. So we're not doing what I chose as my motto, which is harnessing the distributed intelligence of the whole Earth. And that's what we need to use the web for. Right now, the web is a large garbage can with all this distributed stuff, but no one has put in the next layer of filtering and analyzing and source validation. And so what we need to do is take the web to the next level of sophistication.
I imagine that between the 30 days between the response to September 11th, people like Condoleezza Rice or Rumsfeld or Cheney were actually talking to these specialists. So it would be their duty to talk to these specialists.
It didn't happen. It didn't happen.
That would seem to me more to be a failure of these particular individuals rather than the system that.
You know, there's a rational,
systematic.
There's in public administration theory, and I'll come to you in a second. There's in public administration theory. There's a guy who invented the concept of, or discovered the concept of satisficing. And you have the rational model of decision making, and then you have the political model of decision making. Well, rational loses every time. These people are making decisions based on their domestic constituencies, their agenda for being reelected, and who they already know from the corporate world. And I will tell you, the guy that's helping the president understand Afghanistan is a loser that wrote a really shitty book called Sources of Conflict. Zali, I forget his name, but if you look up Sources of Conflict on Amazon.com, you can see my review of the book.
Probably not too well.
No, actually, I don't write negative reviews. I've written, I think, 3 slams. Most of my review. First off, I buy a lot of books. I buy about $6,000 worth of books a year, and I'll buy 4 books for every one that I'll review, and I'll only review it if I think it's really good and should be promulgated to others. The reason that I chose to slam 2 Rand publications was because this is a taxpayer-funded institution, and their editors are simply lazy. They're not willing to do indexes, which are extremely valuable. The people writing the RAND products were intellectually lazy and not doing footnotes and not doing a bibliography. And the information was very badly presented. And so I chose in a very two specific instances to spank RAND publicly. And I don't know if it's had any impact on their publication since then, but I have been told by RAND employees that I was dead on target. And in fact, the individuals who did those two books were not respected within RAND itself. So we got to clean up our act. Think tanks are very bad right now. Universities are very bad. We are impoverished intellectually. And that's separate from the fact that we don't talk to each other in terms of, I mean, Afghanistan should be a national town hall meeting. Go on.
Okay. I guess my second question would hark back to implementing this on a global scale. When you already have allies spying on allies to see if what they're doing, and also distorting their information to their own purposes, how could we trust an expert perhaps from Israel who'd have different interests from us in this particular situation than we might have on our own? How can we trust their information, or perhaps someone from?
I'm not suggesting blind trust. You know, when I always enjoy going to France because the French are big on industrial espionage, and every time I'm in France, I say I want you guys to spend all your money on industrial espionage, because that's not where the return on investment is. The return on investment is on open source, the best return on investment. You still need spies and secrecy and all that, but you really need to seriously think through diverting 10% of the money we now spend on spies to open source foreign language intelligence. Did you want to make a comment or elaborate on the question? And I'm coming back to this. I really want to take my time. And then we'll keep. That's a good question. I don't know. Comment? That's right. That's right. We're set up a baseline.
There can be people in different countries or different areas that may be a subject matter expert on something, it's not necessarily classified or confidential, but it's something that we don't know a lot about.
But then we're not big enough, because I believe the gentleman's point would be who dictates who the expert is, because your expert may be different than my expert. So I think it's a valid question, because it comes down to...
I agree, and I think that one of the ways, first off, let 1,000 points of light bloom. I mean, the web actually gives that meaning. And in any given country, you're going to have your leftist experts and your rightist experts and your anarchist experts. Let all that happen. Over time, I mean, the Amazon.com system for rating books has, in my opinion, created new value. Because I find the reviews very useful. And I find the grading system relatively reliable. I actually make decisions based on the reviews that are there. And I would say every system, one of the things we need to do is add more more validation to everything. Well, the next level up is in fact trust, because nobody has the physics, the time to read everything. And so you're going to have to rely on one another at some point. Yeah, I tell you what I want to do. I want you to step aside for just a minute while I answer these two questions, and in fact, you can come sit here with me if you want. You know, and then I want to come back to your thing, because I really want to dissect this and carry on. Let me get your two questions real quick so you're not standing, and then we'll come back to this.
I deal with information myself, a lot of decision making, and the idea of open source, I've actually seen agents that were sharing certain amounts of their information and that were sharing more information that, let's say, other agents were more successful in their jobs, and they were actually benefiting their people and their governments more. And Also, I think we all have to understand that there's a great level of emergence in self-organizing systems.
Yes,
So
yes.
there's a lot of things that neither me nor you can know, but that will start happening as any hacker in this room.
It could explode.
And it will explode. Just I'll make it one question because we're short on time. You say you read 6,000 books.
No, I said I spend about $6,000 a year on books.
How many
I probably
books?
read about 200 books a year.
200 books. And society, especially in America, but other societies are getting there. We're getting a division, but with people watching television and people going online, and it's actually a good thing because it gets the lazy minds out of the way. And well,
Yeah, but they don't have to be lazy. I mean, we don't have to have a corrupt educational environment. We don't have to have a corrupt media environment. But go on to your question.
I was going to ask, and I've asked you before, but we went more the political way. Could you? There's a certain movement in science called decision-making theory.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar
Yeah,
with that?
and the problem is it's been corrupted by technologists. Decision support in the traditional IT framework. This is another, and CIOs are usually tech weenies rather than knowledge officers. Okay. But decision support is way too biased right now toward automated decision support stuff. And they always assume that the data is both digital and available. Okay? None of the modeling and simulation systems that the US government pays for, by and large, are based on real-world, real-time data. They're all, this manufactured, shoveled shit that is a very small universe of data, and it has absolutely nothing to do with being connected so that it could actually model stuff in real time based on real data. And it generally doesn't deal well with anomalies. And so, from my point of view, intelligence is really about decision support, precisely about decision support. But the theory and the practice hasn't caught up. For example, corporate executives are not held accountable for making informed decisions. And there are no metrics for establishing whether a strategic business decision to invest X million of plants and so forth was actually supported by business intelligence research. And these are the kinds of questions that stockholders need to be answering. There need to be information audits. There are 4 quadrants in my information world. The first quadrant is the so-called knowledge management quadrant, which means make the most of what you already know. And most corporations are mired in the database aspect of this, and they haven't really graduated, although some of them have graduated to Rolodexes and biographies so that you can find an expert based on keyword search and so on. They're really generally very insular and parochial. The second quadrant for me is the collaborative work quadrant. That's where you start getting into people who are wired, who have personal brands, who have Rolodexes, and they have a personal reputation, and they actually know who knows. I mean, I can do amazing things by email because, a young Marine captain in the Pacific Command called me up one day and he said, my colonel just told me I'm in charge of open source intelligence and I don't know what that is. And he found me. I own 85% of the hits on open source intelligence because I've got so much free information, which is another point. Information is a magnet. And the hackers in Silicon Valley, and I talked about this once, and one of them came up with they said that for every piece of information they volunteer or share, they get 100 back, 10 of which are useful. So that's a 10-to-1 return on investment. Also, bigot lists or distribution lists are out of date the minute they're written. Okay, and so you have to have an open system that allows flexibility. Now going back to
So essentially the practice of decision making and
we need to standardize it. So the second one is collaborative work. The third one is external information. And Peter Drucker, the guru of business information, said in Forbes ASAP on August 24th of 1998, on page something or other, he said that we've spent 50 years focusing on the T in IT. We need to spend the next 50 years focusing on the I in IT. And he said the next big revolution is going to be in relation to content and knowledge and how you deal with the substance of it all. most corporations are screwed because they have chief information officers that are technologists. These guys don't know how to ask the intelligence question. They don't know how to get the sources. And one of the problems we have with sources, Factiva costs $2.95 every time you crack a document. Okay? That gets expensive real fast. And so we need new forms of metrics and new forms of dialogue between the source providers and the processing providers. Because right now, to do it properly, automatically, it's too expensive, which is why I devised a system whereby I have an analyst that spends 4 hours, and we will use automation, just normal automation, I don't have anything fancy, to screen 2,000 relevant items. And we'll get that down to 200. And of those 200, a human analyst will read the subject lines and first sentence and make a decision on which 20 documents to crack.
So you bring it down automatically to 10%, and then a human.
Yeah, exactly right. And that saves a lot of money. Because if you cracked every one of those documents under an automated system, you'd actually have a lot of false positives, you'd have a lot of trash in the system. One of the ugly things we found out is that retrievalware eats your homework. We would do very complex selections from Factiva, Dialog, and LexisNexis, and then it would be fed into retrievalware, and because of arcane issues, retrievalware would lose 1/3 of what we had found, okay, when it came out the other end. So I don't think there's a replacement for the human brain right now. So to end, my bottom line point here is that intelligence needs to become like accounting. Not like corrupt accounting, but just like everybody has to do expense reports or trip reports or whatever, intelligence needs to become part of every decision process. And you have to learn that the proven process of intelligence really matters. Asking the right question. Okay, go on. If they pay money. Yeah, see, one of the things people don't realize is that the internet is very, very shallow. If you look at how much information Dialog has online, that is filtered, edited, paginated, structured, reliable. It's 100 times what's available on the internet. One of the problems with the internet is that most information is undated, unpaginated, unsourced, unstable, and you get what you pay for. So we're just at the beginning of this revolution.
So to get a gist of your method, it's usage of existing information.
What's that?
To get back to your quadrant.
Okay, so external information is the next big revolution, because most people are basically making seat-of-the-pants judgments, and they're not really doing the homework, okay? Nor are they being held accountable for not doing the homework. I actually have one success story, because see, one of the problems with the research, Anita Jones, when she was head of research development engineering at DoD, had her people call me, and they brought me in, and they said, how much would it cost for us to track through open source intelligence the relevant critical technologies, of which there are 100? And I said, for $1 million a year, I can do a really decent job, okay? And really, it boils down to about 100,000 per package. But then you can further divide that so that the analyst is actually doing 5 or 10 items on a different week. I found that a week is the right periodicity. Anything less than a week is too much. You can't see the change. Anything more than a week is you miss signals, okay? So we do open source intelligence reports on a weekly basis. But here's a success story. Oh, and then going back to this whole DoD acquisition thing, we don't actually do our homework. I mean, in very rare cases, we don't go look to see if someone else has already built this. Now, special operations needed a man-portable roadblock, and this is a success story. And so they went to the Beltway bandits, and the Beltway said, oh yeah, we can build you some out of titanium, $250,000 each, whatever. Well, they did an open source, SOCOM has a good open source intelligence capability. They did an open source search, and they found that the Norwegians had already built one. And it was a really neat thing with teeth that rolls up in a coil, and you just pull it out and snap it across the road, and it pops right up. And it takes out, any gauge tire. That was a success story, but we don't do that. I mean, DARPA invests millions and millions of dollars in data visualization stuff that has absolutely no relevance or has been bypassed by industry already or whatever. We're just out of control. It's very scary. Let me get the question from the next person, then we're going to come back to unpacking this more complex one.
Okay, I'm a programmer, so instantly I get an idea and I start thinking low level.
You're not obese and you don't smell, at least from here. Are you sure you're a real programmer?
Well, I try to be. One of the things that I'm seeing that I heard you mention before is what we need is not only sources but analysts. In Linux documentation, you have this great thing called how-tos. And basically it's taking somebody who has basic computer skills of a certain set and can bring them up so that they can fully understand some arcane aspect of it. You know.
Yes, that's exactly the thing that we need for distance learning.
How can a document like that be written? Can it be a digestible thing? Can we get the first chapter, something that somebody working at, say, like one of the IMC organizations can post on their website, and they can put that as another aspect of the content they provide to people?
I think the answer is yes. I mean,
so in your opinion, so we could take somebody who knows how to read and write and say something and bring them out in 30 pages or less and say, you know, they can analyze to a certain extent.
Let me put it in a different way. Let's take a typical country. In a typical country, you're going to have some personalities, and you're going to have some issues, and you're going to have some capabilities. And there's no reason why, over time, we can't create one-pagers on each of those. For example, we did 166 out of 200 outstanding biographies that one of our clients had for Latin America. Basically, they wanted standard Defense Intelligence Agency biographies, and we were able to do 166 at a cost of less than $250 each through creative use of the internet and commercial online searching, a very streamlined process, to include photos where they were available. We'd scan them in from newspapers or whatever.
What were these like just different political figures?
Mostly criminals and terrorists, which are harder than normal political figures. Yeah, that's right. But my point is that over time, for example, the University of Texas does some very good stuff on the Zapatistas and other things. I believe that over time you can have a template where a specific group of people who is already paid for, whether it's faculty, students, a public interest group, or whatever, take on responsibility for country X. And they then create a website that takes it to the next order of magnitude or order of sophistication, which is they do a weekly open source intelligence report that is cross-hatched. So you would have, let's say, Colombia, and then you'd have political, military, legal, sociological, economic, ideological, cultural, demographic, technological, natural, geographic. These would be standard categories. And the beauty of this is that the web would then be set up so that if you're interested in the demographics of Latin America, you can put in an inquiry that pulls those demographic paragraphs from all of the different country reports done by different people. So it's a distributed intelligence system that is maintained by differing groups, and over time competing groups will establish different types of trust and confidence. But where we've gone, where we need to go, I think, is we need to add the next layer of analysis, the next layer of focal stuff. And then also we need to seriously revisit lifelong learning. Our schools don't teach what we need to know about the world today. Our newspapers don't publish what we need to know.